everybody. Welcome back to Your Full Crew. I'm Dawn Zolda, one of your co hosts.
And I'm Mike Peel, your other co host.
This was an incredible first season of this Full Crew Tech newscast.
Yeah, and it was a big risk to kind of jump into this, but the audience is growing fast, and we thank everybody's participation from our sponsors to our guests, but most importantly, it was you, the audience, that showed up. So we're really happy to be continuing this into 2023, and it's all because of you.
Absolutely. And we saw some really cool trends. Things like drones really taking off this year.
Yeah, it was year of drones and also counter drone technology. I think in part that had a lot to do with both the regulatory kind of horizon clearing up. We kind of know what the next steps are, and then also just like post pandemic proof that this technology can be used in ways and in places where humans shouldn't be. So that's been really exciting to watch this year, being drone people as we are.
Well, and speaking of which, it was also the rise of the robots, wouldn't you say, Mike?
Yeah, and that's an analogous technology, right? So I think the kind of underlying thing moving both of those spheres forward is that robots are needed ever in more places than we could ever imagine, as we saw logistics and supply chains break down. We also saw the underlying technology get better with computer vision and perception, basically allowing robots to interact not only in physical spaces but with humans in ways that they couldn't easily do before. So it's definitely been a big year for robotics technology.
We also saw a lot of Elon. I mean, let's face it, Mike, it was like all Elon all the time this entire season.
Yeah, so uh, and it's funny. I kind of came into this podcast being Elon neutral, and he's just been annoying.
I would say our number four topic this season, AI, artificial intelligence.
Yeah, artificial intelligence is having. I mean, everybody thought it was already having a renaissance, but I think that it actually has really, really started as we're seeing these AIs actually feeding into each other. That we've gotten better at the training models, that we figured out better ways to train them, and I think the capstone of the year is really ChatGPT 3. And I've been playing around with that. We did a live demo on the show this week or last week, and yeah, the utility is finally there. It's not just slightly making human work better, it's actually increasing human creativity and reducing mundane human work. And that kind of was the promise of computing as far back as 1970. So I'm really excited to actually see it come into its own. And I think we haven't even begun to see what it really means.
Absolutely. And it's really hard to pick a number five, Mike, because we saw tech winners, tech losers, some layoffs happening. We saw a lot of traction in the autonomous ground vehicle arena, people starting to use them to airports and etc. So really hard to pick. Yeah, these are just really the top five, but we covered everything from 5G to, oh my gosh, regulations, lots of lawsuits, all kinds of things this season. It was a banner year. So looking forward to sharing with you some of our favorite clips from this season. And Mike, just to close it out before we roll them.
Yeah, so it's been great. Thank you all. Thank you for supporting this podcast and live stream, and you've made it what it is. We want to thank our sponsors for all the work they've done to help this show get off the ground. But most importantly, thank you to our audience and our guests for really providing the value. All right.
Happy holidays and happy New Year. See you in 2023.
What exactly are we using these robots for? Are we using them to just produce a coffee in an automated way? Or are we using them for something different? And then Romeo came up with a great point about this. Romeo, talk about what you saw in the airport. There it is. That is just
Freak
So
of nature.
amazing.
In this video, if you look in the article, there's a video, and in the video it shows this robot that's in the library, and it scans books, and then suddenly you see a side shot of that robot, and it has glasses on and eyes painted on it to humanize this robot. And that reminded me of San Jose Airport, heart of Silicon Valley, 2016. This robot here was in the airport. It had a little pad where it was stationed, and to get it started, you had to do something. Now, this robot had an artificial face of a young girl, and on the below where the chest and belly area is, there's a big screen, and it says on it, or it said on it, to get started, press my belly.
That's
And I
almost
thought that was
creepy.
so
Like I have
creepy.
to say,
Not almost. That is
almost
creepy.
creepy.
It's just
Yeah.
been some product testing there. It's like,
Yeah, so-
tickle me
so-
Elmo. The ethics board, 9 people on the ethics board have resigned, and it looks like this project has stalled. So, who?
Oh yeah, no, they came out and said they're not. We put a pause on this, and that was after the initial announcement saying their ethics board did not recommend they move forward, but they still did. And then what was it? 2 or 3 days later, we're hitting pause.
So, what were the complications that caused this to fail, other than infighting, finger pointing, and bad PR?
As if that's not enough, Mike.
Well, one that they mentioned in this article was I guess I forget who said it, but it was probably somebody in a leadership position, let's put it that way, came out and was like, well, I just mentioned that I gave the press release okay because I just wanted to start the conversation. And it's like, okay.
While also starting development, like those
Yeah.
are 2 different things.
Slightly different, but there's so many, even if we set the ethics to the side for a second, there's so many technical issues that this could happen because you're entering a chaotic situation with something that is not quiet. I have never heard a quiet drone. And then if you're inside and it's reverberating off the walls, and then are these walls shielded? Certain university buildings I've been in have been completely shielded buildings where signals had a lot of trouble getting in and out. So you have to look at those as well. And even with the ethics on the side, it's a very, very difficult technical problem.
This is just kind of, if you just look back at the history of the Fed rate, it was at 0% for almost a decade. And the people who are actually investing in these startups, they're basically able to take out big loans at 0% interest. So why not invest in a whole bunch of different startups? And you kind of saw this evolution over time where, we're all like secretly talking to each other, like, how is that startup going to make it? That seems like the dumbest idea I've ever heard. And the truth was it was never going to make it, and it was the dumbest idea you ever heard. But there was just so much money to deploy that these venture capitalists had to deploy it. Because where else were they going to put it, right? Where you could possibly, if you hit 1 out of 15 with a Facebook or even a Snapchat, you're paying back in dividends. So I just see this as a big transition into the way that tech investment's going to happen, which companies we actually value. I think you're going to see a shift towards real, actual businesses, also known as rabbits, where you have to prove your business case first before the investment comes. And I'm just curious, knowing that things have changed, what everybody here kind of thinks about it and how that might affect the industries that you cover and participate in.
Well, I will say a point just to jump in. First, I would say that it's mind-blowing that we were able to get through some odd years of COVID, not knowing what was going on, building the infrastructure of work from home, and somehow this was not what we were seeing. We were not seeing massive layoffs like this. And then now it seems like the economy is kind of strange, and this isn't an economy podcast, but it's it's just we're in a weird place. But a lot of this stuff is tech, it's like software or the stuff that's listed on the article. and not hardware. And I think that what we proved for the drone industry through COVID is that there's a lot of staying power with the necessity for this technology, no matter how bad things get or how much feces hits the fan. That there is needs for robots to do jobs, and we're not paying those robots. So there's needs for those robots. That means there's needs for the people building those robots and putting their brains behind the robots. And so that gives me some comfort as we go into this weird, uncertain time where, my wife works for a pretty sizable tech company, and they put a hiring freeze on for, all open positions. And that was like a week ago, and I was like, oh, is something happening? And then it just seems like there's one after another making these same announcements. And Mike, I think you you put this article on here, and it's from today. So this is like something breaking news almost, that these tech companies are making these things happen. And I think that others will see this and follow suit, thinking it's okay. But I think that the drone industry has proven that it can weather these kind of storms.
What do you think, Danielle?
Well, I definitely agree with that. I mean, it's been proven with everything that Randall just said. And on top of that, I mean, in terms of jobs creation, I mean, I know we talk about robots kind of taking over jobs, but really, when you bring a robot in, you're actually creating several more jobs. You're making the jobs, you have somebody overseeing that job, you're having someone take care of the robot, and taking care of the data that it's collecting. So it creates more jobs around that. And I haven't seen any of that let up. People are still looking for people in this industry.
Kind of like, you think of the hierarchy of needs. This almost comes before eating. If you don't have battery, you can't get much done in this world anymore. And yeah, I just kind of wanted to open the discussion up to everybody's knowledge of battery technologies that are out there, what they're seeing in the drone space, because we got 2 drone speakers today. We had kind of talked hydrogen pre-tape, which I thought was further behind in development, but I'm hearing there's some frames out there. So, Bronwyn, you wanna take lead in terms of comments?
Yeah, no, I mean, this is a big part of what we're doing and what we're facing also on the drone development side. The LiPo is that's the horse of the industry right now. For you to get the power that you need, the efficiency that you need, at a weight that is, reasonable for the standard, below 55-pound aircraft that most of us are flying commercially, and also from a hobbyist perspective. But, hydrogen, Harris Aerial has a couple of nice birds with the hydrogen pack. Or designed specifically for hydrogen. That doesn't necessarily work for what we're doing, but it's an option. There's the lithium, the Life battery, that is, another possibility, the LIFE. So, all of these are, under consideration, but the biggest issue we have is just that range issue. Which one can give us the longest range? And for me, it's without having to stop to do so much recharging in the field, or if I do, the mechanism that we're creating to make that happen, and also the cost efficiency of it. And then I think that's why we're seeing people move over to, the eVTOLs, just because you can pretty much, you know what you're getting, and you've got a consistent source. We're going to be using solar to power our rechargers. But it's just how much can that battery take, and then over time, how many charges can I get before I have to send my maintenance back out there to, kind of pull it out. But the last thing I want to say on this, and to the last point we were making before we talked about batteries, is you've got a lot of folks out here creating drones, and not all of them need to be certified, but I think we need to be really careful with all these little drones that are being created, because not all of them are necessarily airworthy. And if you're just a hobbyist having fun, that's fine. But people are creating things professionally that probably won't stand the muster and haven't done the appropriate testing that needs to be done on these kinds of aircraft for, pure safety.
So Chris, you deal in a pretty zero-sum situation when you're doing something like an organ transfer. Like, I'm sure battery reliability comes into the thought process there, right? Because it's also
Right.
limiting the distances you could travel if you're trying to move these organs.
Yeah, I mean, anybody who can crack the code and double the energy density of a battery is going to make a lot of money. But we haven't gone to any exotic chemistries because the cost benefit's just not worth it, right? So there's an economic point, and so we're using all commercial off the shelf right now because the benefits of partnering with somebody, and you could spend a lot of money trying to build the next great battery, but I'd rather let other people spend their money creating the next great battery, and then we just use them when they're available. That's sort of our approach.
Yeah.
It's about drone delivery, and Zipline, for those of you who don't know, have been doing delivery in Africa for a long time now, and they've been testing their systems, and they are essentially doing deliveries every 4 minutes, and that's amazing. And they're doing like COVID vaccines, blood delivery, and any type of medicine they need from one location to another, especially to not easily accessible regions within Africa. And they're moving their operation to the US now, and they just went through certification to get air carrier certified by the FAA. So what does that actually mean, Tony?
So from what I understand it as meaning, as my company owns a Part 135 certificate, an FAA Part 135. So what that means is that we're authorized by the government to fly people for hire, charter. So I believe that Zipline and some of these other companies, Joby, they are getting their 135 certificate. They're not getting it with the understanding that the FAA says, yes, here you go, here's your aircraft certified. They're getting the certification of the certificate to say, at some point, we're going to certify, hopefully, your aircraft, and then we will be able to fly it. Of course, they're starting out with crewed aircraft. So in this situation, and I believe in both situations of the 135s, I'm not 100% versed, but I believe that they added an SR-22, which is a Cirrus aircraft, a little 4-seater single-engine aircraft that they got approved to put on their certificate. So that now gives them a legal certificate to be able to fly for profit, for hire. Then the certification process will now begin for the FAA to certify a new aircraft type. For instance, a Learjet, a Gulfstream, those are aircraft that are already certified by the FAA. So now they're going to certify individually Zipline, Joby, eVair Mobility, whichever ones are putting in for their 135. And as I believe, they're going to be flying with one crewed airman and then eventually autonomous.
So just thinking about somebody, at least two of us know, Chris Anderson, he was pushing for type certification as one of the major points of advancement for the drone industry, because once something's type certified, if you build to that spec, you can reuse it, right? Or you can...
Yes, you just have to go through differences trainings and stuff like that. Yeah. So that's it. Once they get their original done, they get their original aircraft certified, then they can just go ahead and advance on different types after that.
So I thought by now we would have seen a host of type certifications for drones, and nothing yet, right? Anything?
I mean, the FAA everybody has negative things to say about the FAA. I'm not one of them because I think that the FAA has their hands full. Don't forget, they're already dealing with an overpopulated manned aviation system that is, you hear about it all the time, practically crashing down, and we've got all this problem with the airspace. So they're dealing with that. Now we're dealing with everybody and their mothers coming out saying, we need all these new airplanes certified. Well, we can't just throw them up in the air. We have to go through the process of certifying an airplane, and that takes a long time, and it takes people to do that. So we need to actually, and I know the FAA right now, I was just in a meeting in Washington last week, they are amping up. They're adding more people to their UAS division. They're going as fast as they can. So maybe not as fast as they can, but they're doing what they can do. And there's people that are very, very passionate in that organization to see this through. So I'm a believer in the process. I'm an aviator. I've seen the process that they've been through for a long time. And I've seen change come across through the FAA. And I believe that they will be able to get the job done with our cooperation, all of us.
Yeah, the thing to remember with the FAA is that they have a history that they have to overcome, right? They've been doing a fine job with great statistics managing manned aircraft or crewed aircraft, and nobody got promoted at the FAA for putting more things in the sky, right? So
That's
drones
right.
actually do cause an issue for that, why the Part 135 kind of I I don't want to call it a loophole, but in terms of the FAA being able to manage putting automated systems into the sky, or these new kind of smaller UAS into the sky, that's an easier avenue for them to do so than to try and absorb the entirety of every drone pilot who could pick up a DJI off the shelf, or a Pixhawk type drone off the shelf. That the scale and volume of that is a lot scarier, right? So there's that.
Well, you're talking about that and AAM, right? Two different things now.
Yeah. Well, I'm talking about how are they gonna? Because ultimately, it's gonna be managed under one universal traffic management system when it comes down to it. So, but if they can start with AAM and Part 135 style drones, that's actually, it just benefits the smaller drones down the line anyway.
I agree.
And it's an easier kind of foothold for them to understand, and there's less people that they have to talk to make it work. On the other side, if I'm going to bring up the other side of the argument, is like, well, that's not fair, because that becomes only the biggest players are able to do this anyway, and that kind of undermines the principle of the drone revolution, or the small UAS revolution.
Or if you look at the principles, our airlines are the ones who have been paying so far to keep the airspace of where they are, because they're the ones that are using it, right? So that's really the same situation.
Yeah.
The people that have the money are going to be pulling all of the, let's use UTM, on the traffic, unmanned traffic management. That's a huge thing that everyone's studying. NASA, people that own companies, commercial drone users and AAM users are working towards that UTM. That's just a little tiny space in what needs to happen in order to pull this together. So yes, I do believe the AAM players are going to be the ones that are carving the airspace for the rest of the everyone to use. That's just how it is. They have the money to do it. They have the lobbying to do it. They have the voice to do it. And the collaboration is necessary from everyone. And anyone that you talk to in this industry will tell you, including the FAA, please come to us, collaborate with us, help us get through this. We want to be able to get this moving.
So Sally, you've been around since 2013 with me. That's probably around the time I got in, maybe a year later. So how do you think the conversation has shifted from kind of those smaller players being the focus to now, it's zip lines and Google Wing and so on, and Drone Up or Volatus Aero Group, who are getting kind of all the headlines about it?
I feel really conflicted about this because, in a lot of ways, we see this often when the FAA puts together some sort of group, a committee, and it's always the big players on the committee. And then some of these smaller companies say, well, we don't have the resources to do this. We're the little guys. We don't have some VP of policy and a team of 5 lawyers the way some of these bigger companies do. It is really unfortunate that some of these small startups can't really have a voice. But at the same time, as we said, the money is at these bigger players. And if we want to get stuff done, we also need the bigger players that have the money and the resources to do it. And, do you want a small startup that has half of a person working as their legal team, kind of making decisions? Or do you want to default to a company that has, a huge team of lawyers? And so I think there's pros and there's cons. And, the sad reality is sometimes little guys can't participate, but we also want the money to actually get stuff done. I really don't know how I feel about it.
Hey everybody, welcome back to Your Crew. I'm Dawn Zoldi, one of your co-hosts.
And I'm Mike Peel, your other co-host.
We have 2 incredible guests with us again this week, and I'm going to not butcher their bios. I'm going to let them introduce themselves, but first we're going to hear from David Heath of the Pennsylvania Drone Association.
Thanks, Don. Thanks, Mike. As you mentioned, I'm David Heath with the PA Drone Association. I actually have a consulting firm which co-founded, and we manage a lot of other aviation organizations and airports and a lot of other ventures across the state of Pennsylvania. So I'm glad to be here, and we'll pass it off to the next one.
Yeah, and we also have Ryan Johnston, who's from Applied Aeronautics. Ryan, you want to introduce yourself?
Sure. Thanks, Don. Thanks, Mike. Great to be here. So I'm Ryan Johnston. I'm from Applied Aeronautics. We're a fixed-wing manufacturer based out of Austin, Texas. We've been around since 2014, just making affordable long-range platforms for commercial, industrial, and military space. Great to be here.
Yeah, and if you're enjoying what you're seeing so far, or if you enjoy anything in the near future, be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel, give us the like, and hit the notification bell. Same goes for LinkedIn, Twitch, wherever you're listening to or watching the podcast today.
Absolutely. And, this is your newscast, and we've got some big news this week across a whole bunch of different, let's just say, sectors. And we're going to start with, let's call it the state of the states. So David picked this article, and it's actually a report. And so, David, I'm going to hand this off to you to explain what this thing is. And this isn't the first one. This is maybe now the second or third one that has come out.
Yeah, well, thanks, Don. And from my position, it's really unique to try to see how to sell your state to the industry. And so the Mercatus report, this is the third iteration that's come out, and really looks at a lot of different legal standpoints that determines how ready a state is for drones. And within the industry, it's kind of a contentious report. Avigation easements is such a bad terminology, or airspace lease law, and we get into preemption conversations. And, it really kind of shook things up because North Dakota was really always the leading, and now Oklahoma has overtaken. And so as we're looking at that, we look at what activities are happening in those states and truly get to enable a state to broadcast that they're open for drone business, which is a really big goal with managing the PA Drone Association, because we want Pennsylvania to be up on that list. And a lot of the activities that we've done technically are not within those 6 criteria that are in this report, which is why I think that there's more to be added to within it.
Yeah, so David, can you tell us what those 6 criteria are? Just a real quick rundown so people kind of get this context of how these states are being ranked by Mercatus.
Yeah, so there's 6 different ones, and each one's weighted. So the highest weighted one is an airspace lease law. The second weighted is avigation easement law. Then third weighted is either a task force or a program office. Then the fourth down is a law vesting landowner with air rights, landowners with air rights law. Then the fifth is a sandbox, which is kind of think of like test sites where you can test new technologies. And then the last one is job estimates. And so, in a drone world, it's tough to estimate jobs. I mean, it's one thing to be directly into it, but those are the 6 different items.
Yeah, and so you can see how this is very legal heavy and really focused on this idea of who, and I'm using air quotes here, who owns the air, right? And really the role of the states and the private landowners in having drones fly over their property and what rights and authorities they have, which I agree with you completely, David. Super controversial. So my question is, why do you think Oklahoma knocked North Dakota off the top of that list?
Ooh, that's a golden question. I would imagine Choctaw Nation has a good piece in that and what they're doing, and their Department of Aviation is really step things up as they're going through. I know they're working a lot with some of my other colleagues to kind of enhance some new infrastructure, but I think it's just finally getting the buy-in. It's something that we, within the Drone Association, I like to say we create drone champions. That's the goal of any organization, is the people that are involved are already on the ship. It's how do you get everyone else to be like, yes, this is a worthwhile investment.
So I'm going to pivot to Ryan for a second. Ryan, you're primarily based, Applied Aeronautics is primarily based out of Austin, Texas. So did you peek at the report and see where Texas stands on this list?
I did it, and Texas is, I think, what, 12 or 14 or something like that. So it's a bit further down. Yeah, it's not bad. I mean, it's interesting because, you're absolutely right. You need the legal framework, kind of in place, but at the same time, you need public opinion as well, right? And that's sort of probably kind of the other side of it that needs to be there. That's with public opinion, getting public safety out of the way, which is obviously number one. With public opinion, that actually helps you get all the things like operations done, people understanding, hey, this is not out of the blue, this is some sort of commercial operation occurring. And I think that's sort of the big missing link in everything here, right? That's the other side of all this.
Yeah, that's a great point. It's not all about the regulations, and that's maybe where this criteria could be beefed up a little bit, but to be consistent, I think over time, they're sticking with their original criteria for the most part.
The research, you're going to see there's like more than 3 models right now within the Navy that could have been doing that. And
Wow.
under that time limit, and they did some simulations. They did like some simulations to see using the same track, doing the same mission with a drone. They do under a minute, very precisely and all this. So it's amazing how things change, right? From Top Gun, even from Top Gun 2 when they filmed that in 2019.
Yeah, I would love to get John's perspective on this. John, first of all, John, did you see the movie?
I did, and I watched the original one 2 days before just to catch me up.
You almost have to, right? You got to like watch the original Top Gun and then go right to the movies and see the next one to kind of get some of the differences and a lot of the continuity.
Well, that came out when we were teenagers, so we all know that. We can quote that movie by heart. But it's funny when he was talking about all the things that drones can do that humans can't. And I thought about what Top Gun is too. It occurred to me they used to say the same things about NASA. Why don't we just send robots to do all these missions? Why do we keep sending humans? Because NASA needs funding, and it's good PR to have humans be heroes, right? And so, and let's not. It made Tom Cruise a lot of money, but it's a heck of a lot of good PR for the U.S. Navy.
Passed the House, so this came through really quick, and it's a really interesting bill because it's framed in almost a defense language, right? So the idea is this is a $52.7 billion bill, and it's for national defense. And it also prohibits the recipients of federal incentive funds from expanding or building new manufacturing capacity for certain advanced semiconductors in specific countries that present a national security threat to the United States. So this is very clear that we're not just giving money out to strengthen the chain with what I'm assuming is China or other perceived threats, but on the other side of that, we're also only giving $500 million to establishing other international chains. So this seems to be very, very domestic focused. If only 1% is going to building other international alternatives. This also comes off the heels, and I don't have the article because I just saw it this morning, but Intel had a terrible quarter. Losing a lot of money, some bad investments, closing down programs, specifically the Optane memory chips, which kind of went the way of their Itanium processors. Very similar story. And I think one of the questions, if people are against this bill, they might be saying, why are we subsidizing an industry in the United States that's actually underperforming, specifically with the actor Intel being at the top of their list of bad actors. My personal feelings is I think that this is good for the drone industry. It's good for a lot of other U.S. industries because having a near monopoly on the chip pipeline overseas, we need to establish some backstop, some redundancy, especially post-pandemic after we saw what happened. PlayStation 5s are still overpriced. So I want to throw this over to Chad because he's got some history with Qualcomm. He understands what it takes to make a chip. And what are your thoughts on the bill?
I think we have to get very, very serious, and it's probably more than quickly about bringing this technology back to the United States. It was not that long ago that Intel was the leader, and TSMC and Samsung were playing catch up, and there was a good competition, between those three, and Global Foundries and some others are AMD, and TSMC has just run away with it, and Samsung stayed right in there. But it is, obviously there's real concerns with Taiwan, and so for the supply chain to be at that high of risk, if Nancy Pelosi can't even go to Taiwan now without whatever causing a huge problem or whatever the
1,000 YouTube videos it spawns, right?
Yeah. So if we can't even go there, like, how are we gonna? How is our entire economy gonna rely on a single, on a single company in a single country? We have to diversify really, 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 really quickly. And it's whether you believe in these government subsidies to help make that happen, it's proven to work everywhere else. That's what's going on in China and the other country. Where China subsidizes their chip companies. And so if we're going to be competitive, we've got to make this stuff happen. And in the U.S., we subsidize all sorts of things. And so why not? This is probably the most critical thing to our economy that could be possibly going on. We've got to. It's important. I'm glad it's moving forward, but I believe it's critical, and it's not going to be next year that we're caught up. It's going to take some real time too. This is tough stuff. There's only one company in the world that makes these machines, this ASML, and it's going to be a tough go. I don't think this is just the beginning of us trying to get caught back up. It's going to have to be a 10-year effort to make sure that we're there, and we're there, and then in an economic and efficient manner that, of course, is self-sustaining and ideally helps the country grow significantly.
Yeah, I mean, the majority of the funds are going to be deployed in the first year, so that's a good point, Chad, that I didn't think about, that there might be some reflection on this year after year and money stacked on top of it, that this is really kind of just the beginning of many bills of this type, because we are behind, and some people are projecting it would take us 10 years to catch up. Well, we'll see. 10 years is a pretty long projection, right? So just real quick before we move over to Michael, what are your thoughts about establishing alternative pipelines with different regions of the world? Because there was only 500 million put to that, which I thought was a low number, and I think the expectation to be able to build in the United States, that might actually put us behind if we're trying to rapidly build this up for defense purposes, because it takes longer and more money to build here in the United States than it would, say, in South America or Africa or even elsewhere in Europe.
Yeah, that part I'm not as familiar with. I guess I would have assumed it was more of a South Korea thing with Samsung. That would maybe they're not as, or well, I guess they have their, South Korea always has a little bit of a problem with North Korea, but
just a little
tiny
bit. but there's that's my assumption, is where that would end up going, is trying to help move some of this stuff over to Samsung as well. But I that part is not as clear to me.
Awesome. And also on that front, we've made a recent, I think, agreement with Japan, who's also going to be funding some research on this side, and they're investing in an allyship on this front, much like we actually had prior to 1999. So, Michael, this is clearly written from a defense angle. AUVSI has great insight into defense contractors, manufacturers. What's the rumblings from your side of the fence?
Yeah, so first and foremost, I think this bill really was envisioned to level the playing field for the United States. The word subsidy gets thrown around a lot, and perhaps in some ways it's a fair term, but to Chad's point, other countries, particularly China, have been subsidizing their industries to the detriment of U.S. manufacturing for a long time, and we've seen that in a number of industries, whether it's semiconductors or solar panels or drones. And increasingly, U.S. competitiveness and U.S. manufacturing and U.S. workers have been on the losing end of those Chinese subsidies. So what Congress worked on with the CHIPS and Science Act was a full package. You mentioned $52 billion in dollars to domestic manufacturing, but it's actually a $280 billion bill, and more than $100 billion is going to research and development, largely through the National Science Foundation, that'll be spread out over the next decade to enhance U.S. competitiveness, enhance U.S. R&D, and enhance U.S. manufacturing. So it's actually a significantly larger investment in the United States. And while all of that is geared primarily towards semiconductors and sort of generating the next evolution of semiconductors, that's going to have direct impacts on the drone industry, on the automated cars and trucks that are on our roads, really across all domains of uncrewed systems technology.
Just think about it as a battery to keep it simple. So when you're using hydrogen fuel cells, you have no emissions. It's electric. You can make hydrogen from water with renewable energy. So when you think about that compared to batteries, lithium is not an infinite resource, and it's not a sustainable process. It's pretty bad. If you look up how to make lithium, and some of the, sometimes we have these weights. Some of the Teslas were slow coming out because they couldn't get to the lithium and make their batteries. So you have water, that's abundant. Hydrogen is the most abundant element in the universe. You can make it with renewable energy. You can put it in a fuel cell, and you can supply power to cars. And there are a couple hydrogen fuel cell cars that are already on the market. I'm happy to answer any questions. But then the second piece that I wanted to talk about was, I'll pause there, and because I just said a lot. I'll pause there, and then we'll get into the next part.
I know Mike's going to take this, but I got to say, I waited 2 years for my Tesla, so I know what you're talking about, Danielle. And I know Mike's going to maybe hone in on this company that's creating this stuff, and maybe the leader of it too.
Yes.
Sorry, I don't remember the company. Was it Hydroplane?
It's Hydroplane.
Yeah, it's Hydroplane. Yeah, and it's Anita Sengupta, Dr.
Yes.
Sengupta. Yeah.
But what I think is just to even just kind of jump on something Danielle was saying, like you could see the pictures of the lithium fields. They're so toxic that if a bird lands on it, it's instantaneously dead. The fumes could actually take a bird out. So
it's nasty stuff.
Yeah, it's pretty terrible for the environment. I guess the trade-off there is the hope that you're able to store more energy than you're expending or wasting during the production. And I don't know, I've never seen those numbers, but in comparison, what we know about hydrogen used at the scale it's used today, the output is water, right? For this battery-like technology. Thank you for explaining that, by the way. I didn't know, I just assumed it was exactly like a battery, except that the conductive material was some type of hydrogen mix or something. But knowing that it's actually the offset, that's kind of really interesting. Did you want to dive into the founder though? Because that's also an interesting story.
And so, and another piece. Okay, so I'm a futurist. I'm always looking at the future, and I'm wrapping up a workforce study that I did with that High Sky did with the Vertical Flight Society. They're a nonprofit, large aerospace nonprofit, about 6,000 members, and something that we've been seeing is just a high demand and a lack of available people that understand this. We've got some of these experts that are either retiring or kind of moving around to different companies, and we're not attracting people to this space. And so in this paper, which will be published soon, I dive into and here's, I'm going to make a bold statement, and I can back it up. The biggest threat to the aerospace and defense industry is diversity, because we are losing talent at extremely high rates. So legacy aviation companies are, they've got attrition rates for women and underrepresented groups that are double the rest of the national average. And then you take aviation startups, including drones and eVTOL and all of these other things, they're double already that really bad number. And this costs companies hundreds of millions of dollars. And what happens is, and it's going to come back to Dr. Sengupta, what happens is, when a lot of companies are formed, it's it's typically men who have known each other and have working relationships, and that's not necessarily a bad thing. But let's say, 4 or 5 guys get together, they form a startup, they've got these really good relationships, they get funding, they start growing, and before you know it, they've got 20 guys that work there, and now they're like, okay, we got to get some women in here. And then they bring in a woman, and she's the only woman. Well, they didn't know that one of their friends was a little bit toxic, right? So then that woman ends up having a not so great experience, and it's so much easier for those 20 guys to be like, no, they would never do that, than to actually believe that woman. And so I say all of that to say, to really save our industry, diversity has to start on the board with the founders. And so if you don't take the time to really have diversity at your board, you won't have a company. And so the reason I picked Dr. Sengupta and Hydroplane is because she did exactly that. And there are other companies that are working on hydrogen, but if you look at her team, who she's got on her board, or her founders, I'm just blown away. And sure enough, they're moving fast. They're moving faster than some of the other companies. And, I talk to a lot of these guys and they say, well, there's just not any aerospace engineers that want to work that are women or that are people of color. Interesting, because we don't have time to talk to them all. There's so many. So they're out there. They just are being a little bit more selective. It's not like it used to be back in the day where you could put a picture on a website and people go there. Now we're looking at the board, we're looking at Glassdoor, we're looking on TikTok, we're looking on Twitter, and we're seeing not only what do your current employees say, but who left your company, why did they leave, and what does your board look like? And if you can't put people in leadership, then you can't guarantee a safe space for me. And that's kind of the attitude of the future workforce. And so Anita's got the technology. Sorry, Dr. Sengupta. Anita is my friend, so I'll slip and call her that. But Dr. Sengupta, she's got that. She's got the technology. She's decarbonizing aviation. She hit all of the things for her to literally dominate this space in a decade or two. So
what was her
I'm just really excited about
previous
that.
experience? Because I think that's important too to the story. Where was she
Sorry,
prior?
what was it?
She was with NASA.
Yeah, she worked on the Mars rover. She worked on what was it? I think it was the Hyperloop thing.
Yes,
don't quote
she
me on
did.
that. Okay,
She worked
thank
with
you.
the Hyper. I mean, this woman is a rock star. By the way, if you're not going to Move America, it's a conference on advanced mobility, multimodal systems at the end of September in Austin, Texas, 28, 29 September. I will be there. And Dr. Sengupta is one of the speakers. And that group just put out a great paper called The Disruptors. And it highlights a number of women, including Sharon Rossmark, CEO of Women in Drones, who is actually moderating the panel I'm on, and Dr. Sengupta is also highlighted. So I was really honored to be in that same paper with these women. But Rui, I'd love to get your thoughts. I mean, we just kind of talked about a lot of different things, hydrogen in general, this idea of diversity in a workforce. Love to hear your thoughts on kind of where any or all of this is going.
I have a lot to say actually. First of all, I fully agree with Danielle, but I would even say more than that. When there's let's start with a I would say another overview. Usually, I'm very cynical about PC in language, all kinds of stuff. But I remember the day that I saw that people stopped using unmanned and stopped calling it uncrewed. Yep. And at first I said, well, is it really necessary? And I immediately went into, wow, it's amazing. This is the exact thing we need to do, because it's these small things, but not just the small things, but in the right time. And Daniel, you talked about guys that bring guys. It's not guys bringing guys. It's humans that know how to recruit humans that are alike them. The more similar they look to me, then it's easier for me to understand them. And what we see is that it's the drones industry in this understanding, in the new aviation, I would say, it brings something new, because the diversity is not starting now. I mean, it started actually quite recently, but when we started about being proactively understanding and being aware of diversity, it's a little bit too late, right? I mean,
artificial intelligence affects all, across the board, the entire tech sector. And this case was called Thaler, Thaler versus Vidal. And the question presented here was whether or not artificial intelligence alone could be listed as an inventor for purposes of patent law under the U.S. Patent and Trademark Act. And the answer the court gave here was absolutely not. Solely listing artificial intelligence as the only inventor is not acceptable. That under the plain law of the statute, under the plain text of the statute, it discusses individuals, and individuals under other case law are considered to be natural persons, aka human beings. So what happened here was this guy named Dr. Stephen Thaler. He's got a artificial intelligence he's created. It's called, I think, DABUS or DABUS, D-A-B-U-S. It's an acronym for Device for Autonomous Bootstrapping of Unified Science. And what this thing does, it pulls all kinds of open source information and creates ideas that can be patented separately. And the two ideas here were this thing called the neural flame and the fractal container. Taylor, because he had absolutely nothing to do with creating these ideas for this invention, it was DABUS, it was the AI that did it, listed solely that AI as the inventor, and that's what kind of sparked the case, because the Patent and Trademark Office declined the applications. And so he filed a lawsuit in federal district court. It made its way up, and across the board they said, nope, it's got to be a human. Now, what are the implications of this? There's a couple, because as Mike alluded to in the very beginning, this is an international issue. I mean, my son just showed me a beautiful painting completely created by AI, right? So, when you think about intellectual property, who is the owner, who is the creator of that for purposes of patenting or copywriting or trademarking that? And at least in the United States right now, at least under case law, interpreting the Patent and Trademark Act, the answer is it cannot be the AI. And so here's the implications. If AI patents in the US was able to patent these works, it would be in the public domain. Okay, so there's a couple ramifications to this. One is that could it decrease R&D on the human side? If AI is out there creating all this stuff, will it flood the market, if you will, and all the good ideas will be taken up by the computers? So again, really, really weird stuff. Internationally, a big concern. There are countries that have policies on this, but there's no kind of one international standard. And so I read a different article, Mike. I didn't send it to you, but there's 4 paths here. Number 1, don't make any legal changes. Let this all resolve by itself. We're kind of seeing that a little bit in the U.S. and the drone world with Race Day Quads versus FAA, where, well, let's just, let it live and let live and figure out what's going to happen. You can absolutely prohibit the AI from being an inventor. That's what kind of happened here. The upside doesn't interfere with human R&D, but it can decelerate investments in AI itself.
Yeah, because there's no incentive to develop the technology then. If whatever you make with it will be open sourced.
Here's an interesting path. Allow the AI works, allow them to create these works, but do not protect them. And so this can facilitate innovation in AI tech, promote its use for public good. But then there's a whole bunch of other questions related to this. Who's going to bear responsibility if there's negative consequences of those inventions? And last is allow and protect the AI works. Again, boosting the AI sector, possibly at the expense of human R&D, devaluing human creativity. But could there be limitations? Maybe it's protected for a year. Maybe it's protected only in certain sectors like health and education. So many weird open questions, but super relevant. I don't know that any AI is absolutely creating advanced air mobility aircraft or things related to drones. But you could see that AI is weaved technologies all throughout those drones. So what happens when it starts self-perpetuating? Big questions here, guys. So Esther, what are your deep thoughts on this?
Yeah, living in Switzerland, my opinion is that somewhere in the middle. So I'm a big fan of automation, but I think there is always need for a human interaction. So I think, in my humble opinion, but again, I'm not an AI expert, but what I think is that there should be automation, there should be AI, but it should be reviewed by humans, and it should be connected, to someone responsible for the outcome. And this is how I see, and I think it's fantastic. We should automate, we should use software, we should have everything in place, but there should be a person who check the end results, who take responsibility for the end results, and who think that's the end results which she or he can stand for, And I think the truth is somewhere in the middle in this mixture. And like that, the pattern can be connected to a person, and the person knows what happened exactly, how it happened, can review, and maybe it's a little bit slowed down the process. I can see that, and maybe it involves even manual work somewhere in the process, So it's not gonna kind of boom and automate that quick. But I think that's the way, somewhere in the middle. This is how I see. But I'm very keen to listen to the others' thought as well.
Dave, what do you think?
So when you had spoken, a couple words jumped out at me: consequence, responsibility, and devaluing. I think we need to have some level of responsibility in the work that's performed, and if artificial intelligence is responsible for that, I don't know where liability then goes. So I am a firm believer in having some air gap, some separation between human and computer. I spent my whole career doing software development, and I love the way that artificial intelligence has evolved over the years, and machine learning, just everything about it is exciting and awesome. But I don't see it being necessary to go 100% all the way.
Basically, they're doing the investigation because there was, several crashes, between 273 crashes between July 20th, 2021 and May 21st, 2022, with Tesla vehicles using their autopilot. So there's a big NHTSA investigation undergoing on this particular function, which, by the way, seemed a lot of these crashes involved parked public safety vehicles. So this guy's testing it on his kids. I'd love to hear some thoughts on this. Rex, you first.
Wow. It's like,
It's almost like, what else can you say?
Hey, you're going to be a test dummy today, okay? Just stand there. Trust me.
Don't move.
No, it's interesting. Yeah, it's when you first went down that road, I get this mental picture of the video of the guy that invented bulletproof glass, and he was holding it up in front of him while his wife shot it. I'm like, okay.
At least it was him. At least he was going to take the bullet, not his freaking
Right.
kids.
It's like, hey, hold this, and I'm going to shoot at you. Yeah, it's kind of like, I'd hope that we've evolved to better testing than that, especially with some of this is like, there's not a lot of margin for error in something like that.
Yeah, that's awful.
Yeah, so
Yolanda.
I'm stunned. Are we now going to see taglines on products that say "No children were harmed in the manufacture and operation"?
Oh my God! Just like a lawyer. Just like a lawyer. No children were harmed in the testing of this vehicle.
I don't even know what to say.
I think it's a really interesting kind of take on not only, just an amazing use case for this technology, but also how it's becoming more democratized. Maybe you don't need a $70,000 scanner to do what they're doing with a couple of cameras, and an older scanner and a commercial drone or a hobby drone because that's what they have. And it's just an interesting kind of take on that. But the work they're doing is absolutely beautiful. I hope you have a chance to just poke around in it.
So Carla, this company is called Skerion, Skerion.
Yes.
Now, are they Ukrainian or are they from a different country?
Nope,
They
they're
are.
Ukrainian.
Wow.
It's founded by three guys who all went to university together. They all studied various things and decided that they really enjoyed kind of the point clouds and mapping and GIS and things like that. They all kind of got a different specialty. Some of them were on the software side, some of them were more on the capture side. So they decided to go into business together shortly after they graduated, kind of just doing what you do when you're a reality capture company, going into buildings and producing 3D models for people. And then they just completely switched gears and got everybody they knew that could to help them to capture more of these heritage sites.
And so for everybody out there, if you haven't checked it out, it's hashtag Save Ukrainian Heritage is how you can find these guys and what they're doing and support them if you'd like. But Jennifer, I'd love to pick your brain for a second, being a lawyer, myself being one as well. So many law schools don't even teach international humanitarian law, certainly not the law of war like the military knows. I was a JAG. We kind of alluded to in the beginning, this violates the law of war, this violates international law. Can you tell us a little bit about why cultural heritage is so important to the world?
Well, I'm not sure that I'm fully qualified to talk about that topic in depth, but thank you for asking me. I think, certainly our ability as people to relate to each other across borders is essential to our humanity, and probably underlies a lot of the international treaties that we have. And I think this work to essentially provide, digital twinning, if I'm sort of understanding the preservation of these heritage sites, is that is really fascinating. And as I was listening to Carla, I was thinking this kind of digital twinning of what is in the real physical world today and putting that in the metaverse would be kind of an amazing thing, so that we all can continue to experience what culture is like across borders, and help to, achieve better understanding of humans one to another.
You hit the nail on the head, Jennifer, actually, and I didn't mean to put you on the spot, but really, when you look at the 1954 Hague Convention for the Protection of Cultural Property in the Event of Armed Conflict, which, by the way, of course, took years to come to finalization after World War II, and almost the complete destruction of Europe, not to mention, of course, Nagasaki and Hiroshima. So when you think about that, the words they use are "quote unquote" damage to the cultural heritage of all mankind, and that really, those words give me chills, because it just underscores the significance, not to necessarily one nation, one group of people, the significance to all of us of these these cultural heritage sites that are now codified in not only The Hague, but also kind of echoed in the 1977 additional protocols for the Geneva Conventions, the Statute for International Criminal Court in 1998, and the additional protocols to the Hague Convention themselves that were updated in 1999. All of this has become part of customary international law, and this idea that number one, if you have cultural sites, you have a duty as a nation in conflict to try to protect those. And of course, if you're a belligerent on the other side of the fence, you have a duty not to deliberately target those. And of course, we know that a lot of these sites not only get destroyed, but sometimes they just get pilfered. We're still seeing today paintings from World War II, right, that were stolen from Jewish families that are now just being returned. That's also an obligation. Any of these cultural artifacts, there is a duty to return them. And so, that's all under international law. And if you want to really nerd out or learn more about this, because I think it's such an important topic, go to the International Committee of the Red Cross, ICRC website. They have amazing resources out there, and the ICRC is like the global watchdog for all of these different treaties and international law when it comes to armed conflict.
Yeah, you know, Carla, when I actually came across this article before it was submitted. Normally, I'm always surprised by what the guests bring up, but this issue specifically has been on my mind since one of my Muslim friends brought up how much damage had been done in Syria. This was years ago. He had told me about it, to culturally significant sites, and essentially, you know, I think the thing that kind of tipped him off, I was talking about Notre Dame and how the preservation of that was possible because of drone flights that had been done, or at least this is something that helps in the rebuilding effort, is the fact that we had scans of the building in the first place. And, you know, Wikipedia to this day lists 25 sites that were damaged or destroyed during the conflict, the main conflict in Syria. You know, it's still somewhat ongoing, right? And those things will never come back. And it's devastating to think that you won't have those things as a reference point to teach history. You know, you might disagree with history as it progresses and we learn better ideas, you know, as we evolve together, but not having the reference point to even discuss it is a loss.
His winning image was called Théâtre d'Opéra Spatial, Space Opera Theater, and it was made with Midjourney. It's an AI system that can produce detailed images when fed written prompts. Well, here's the rub, everybody. The judges didn't know that he used AI pretty much almost exclusively to create this. Now, what he said was, I think he had like 900 iterations and he had to manipulate those. And then he also used, what's that, you know, kind of finishing software. He used another software. I forget
Photoshop?
the name. I apologize. Yeah, he used Photoshop to finish it, things like this. But I'll tell you, and it was only a $300 prize, right? So the stakes weren't high here. But, you know, just from a philosophical standpoint, for many people, and especially many artists, it was a big deal. And you had folks just jumping out on Twitter. I love this quote, so I'm just going to say it. Some Twitter user wrote, quote, "This sucks. For the exact same reason we don't let robots participate in the Olympics." And, you know, it does. It raises so many interesting questions because, you know, the human, you know, kind of machine AI interface, where's the line drawn? And it really does, Mike, as you said, it ties into a previous Full Crew episode where an inventor had submitted in the United States a couple of patents that his AI created the design completely, and he listed the AI as the inventor. And the U.S. Patent and Trademark Office said, no, you know, there needs to be a human inventor under the law. And the court agreed under the terms of the statute, under the language of the statute, it had to be human. So, you know, think about that in terms of art, because so much art, you know, it gets copyrighted, it's intellectual property. I just see a lot of connections between that last article and this, but also the kind of societal implications to this. What does art really mean? And who gets to create it? And how much robot is okay to still be called truly art? So I know this is all mind-blowing because we're talking about metaverses and we're talking about flying cars, and now we're talking about, you know, AI just creating beautiful works of art with a little bit of human assistance.
Could I go first on this one, Dawn? I got a lot on this. So as somebody who started as a designer and had to learn all this tech stuff, the idea that it's no longer art because somebody used a tool is like saying that every piece of art has to be completely alla prima from the person's mind. Like, oh, I painted this perfect human body. What about, you know, just the methods that they used in the Renaissance, like setting up wires to make sure they had the thirds? Is that no longer art now? What about the camera that I'm using now? You know, you could take beautiful landscape photography of it, and is that not art? And one of the most like hated kind of moments in art school, because I went for one semester, was when this photographer took somebody else's photo and then put a different frame around it. And the teacher wanted us to talk about the philosophical implications of it. And my whole thing at the time, and I still stand by it, is, well, she sold it, so somebody thought it was art. And yes, applying a new frame to something is an iterative process. You've created new context for the piece, and legally and emotionally, it's art unless you want to be angry about it because it was too easy, right? So that's kind of the issue here. And the truth is, there's an assumption of easiness. So actually, our thumbnail is going to be used with Wamba Dream. We're going to use some AI art to actually create the thumbnail for this episode, just to kind of make the point at how easy it is to get started. But to get to the image that this person actually created, having used these tools, it requires an understanding of how that tool works. His prompt was probably over 500 words, which means he tested how it looked each time, and then he still had to refine it. So the person is still definitely in the loop here. And, if a computer generated 10,000 images all by its own with no input, I don't think we would call that art because there's no narrative, especially in the West. Actually, I'll limit that to just the West because there's different contexts for art globally. But in the West, we tend to think of art as narrative. Like, what's the story, right? People buy the story behind a piece. I think about Banksy's piece that he tried to, ruin through the shredder as it was sold. The minute it was sold, and then the shredder broke. That just sold for, I think, 4, maybe 5 times its original auction costs. Why? Because it's got one of the best stories in art history. So you want to buy a piece of that story. So that's my take on this. It's still art. It's an exciting new evolution. It's a nice new tool.
So,
I think
Vijay, go ahead.
I paint a lot and I like it and I draw, and we've got artists in our lineage. My grandmother paints, my mother paints, and it's like never ending. I mean, like, there's Klimt right there at the back as well.
Cool.
So I mean, like, I love art, and I love all the eras and the evolution. So I do agree with Mike here. This is an evolution. I think there is a bit to this in terms of the fact that if somebody using Midjourney won an art contest, I don't necessarily think, like, if it's a Midjourney only art contest, I get it. But if it's not, then I don't, because it's still a situation where I would still argue, maybe from my point of view, where it's not necessarily the most skill-based, or technique-based or years of practice-based sort of result that you've achieved. There was a respect at some point for that in the traditional scope of art or any format of art, where it was practiced and then perfected, and then the result was sort of given over.
Yeah, but that's...
I think...
Okay, sorry,
yeah,
I don't want to cut you off.
So just with regards to this, I think it's a medium, it's a tool, but I think the biggest problem and why it's becoming a moot point is the fact that I would assume it's 70% or 80% plus of the job is being done by the tool, and not necessarily. So it's like 20% on the person running the program. So I use Photoshop, and then sometimes there are things that Photoshop did do, and I know lots of people using Midjourney right now, and you can create some really amazing looking stuff. It's a creation. I don't necessarily think that, I think it's still a creation or an exploration. I don't think it'll ever sit at the level of a Klimt or an impressionistic kind of masterpiece, right? Because that's years of somebody either going through a crazy life and then telling a crazy story with each piece of work, So
yeah, that's kind of my point. There's a story to Klimt. You're buying the human's journey, right? Everything that took them to get to that point is what makes it interesting to us as people. Otherwise, it's just wallpaper.
It's the International Aviation Transport Association that's talking about this. There's been a lot of consternation, and particularly in the U.S., that this 5G rollout is using a radio spectrum that is very close to radar signals, and that is causing them to want to delay this rollout near airports where it could interfere with instrument approaches in that, of course, need to be very safely deployed. So interested from an aviation standpoint, but I'm also interested, there are a couple other things about it. First, 5G rollout and the Internet of Things and all of the things getting connected, and autonomous driving vehicles and the use of it maybe for urban air mobility, all are quite intriguing, and how this might get rolled out. But what are the unknowns that are causing risk to the airspace or to the people on the ground? So, and also, just how do you deploy this with all that, all of the different items that are going to be linked together? I live in a rural area of Colorado, so we probably aren't going to see 5G for many years. But when I go to Denver or Colorado Springs, what am I going to encounter there? So that's what was interesting me. It really a safety issue.
Yeah, it certainly, it seems like 5G is more contentious than all the other Gs that preceded it, or maybe that's just because I'm learning more about it as time goes on. Taylor, actually, David, what's your take on the 5G wars or the spectrum battles?
I think there's a lot to still be figured out there. I think a lot of vendors that make small drones especially are waiting to kind of see what standards are out there, what innovations come about it, and where people really put kind of a foothold on things. I think also, like, a big challenge is the swap constraints. Is if you're going to integrate new hardware onto a lot of systems that are out there for different networks, how is that going to impact the vendor too? And with supply chain issues and everything else that can kind of snowball into this, I think there's a lot still to be kind of figured out about how people are going to implement this.
Yeah, I was going to jump in and being military, former military myself, David, you use the term there. I'm going to just define it, the acronym SWAP, size, weight, and power. That's a significant issue, right? As you integrate new technologies especially onto smaller drones. But back to Taylor's point, this 5G rollout has been contentious from the get-go. If you guys all recall, it was what I think December was supposed to be a big rollout. I believe it was T-Mobile and Verizon, and the FAA threw the red card down, and it was just like, what is happening? Because the FAA was like, hold on a minute, this is going to interfere with significant, safety. Is it called, Taylor, safety of life, or the instrumentation, like you said, for IFR, instrumental flight rules, and so then there was a pushback, literally a pushback of the timeline. And I think ultimately some of this was rolled out in January, well off schedule. But even so, the FAA was still putting out warnings to people, to pilots, like, hey, like, if you're in this area, your instruments might not actually work. And here we have now IATA coming on board. It's like September, and we're still talking about this. And my thinking is, why have we not figured this out yet? Why are the agencies not working more closely together on these things? When we're talking about safety of life and critical instrumentation, and so, it's just kind of mind-boggling that we're still having this conversation today, even though some of this technology has already been deployed.
If there's just one truism in the law of the sea for the last thousands of years, it's that a ship has an onboard crew, and with autonomous ships, for the first time, you have ships without crew on board. And with this, essentially the assumption on which the entire law of the sea is built is kind of no longer fulfilled. And this also holds true for maritime security, which I'm mainly interested in. The assumption has been that offenders would be on board ships, enforcers would meet suspect at sea, they would board a suspect ship, they would exchange physical documents to prove nationality nationality of the ship. They would interrogate suspects, etc. So there would be human interaction, physical documentation, but with autonomous ships, you simply don't have an offender at sea. Offenders may act from dry land. Autonomous ships may no longer have certificates on board, but function with e-certificates. So everything changes from how you handle cargo ships, who is a seafarers, up to maritime security issues in how do you board an autonomous ship, and does it make sense to board an autonomous ship if there is no person on board. And so the IMO started to regulate these ships, and just last week there has been a meeting by a working group discussing terminology which is basic but essential, such as what is a master? If the master is no longer on board, can a remote operator be a master? You know, traditionally all function has been incumbent on one single person, the master. He was in charge of everything. Is that also the case with remotely piloted or fully autonomous ships, or can that role be split? And if so, who would be the interlocutory for enforcers, etc.? All of these issues have to be discussed and are currently discussed. And this article is also interesting from a regulatory perspective, because it's true that new technologies have always been the driver for new roles within IMO, but autonomous ships are somehow peculiar because it's a technology which is still in development. So for regulators, it's kind of difficult to grasp what they should regulate, because the end product is not yet there. And it's also difficult to understand when one should regulate these ships, because if you regulate them too early, you risk to lock in the technology through your regulation. And if you don't regulate, you risk to hamper innovation, because investment is only done if you're certain that your product will be lawful. And so there's a bit of a paradox. You should wait and hurry at the same time. And so the IMO has chosen a non-binding instrument, which is much more flexible than hard treaty law, which is a very rigid and slow process. So the IMO has chosen a soft law approach, which allows to integrate, to make first regulatory experience and then to integrate all that experience in a binding code, which will only be issued at a later stage. So it's both from a substance point of view, but also from a regulatory approach view, very interesting what's going on within IMO.
Yeah, so actually, before we go to Sean's response to that, we've got a question from the chat. Mason Jar M. If there's no crew, what steps would be taken to protect the cargo or vessels from potential hijackers?
That is a great question.
Yeah, so like you've seen people can, even on a less kind of consequential, arena or vector, you've seen people actually just tamper or play around with automated vehicles. We actually brought that up too, where you'll purposely step in so they can't go forward. So it would make sense that if the cargo is valuable, why wouldn't I just board the ship if I'm not expecting anybody to be combative? So
exactly. And also, in case of boarding an autonomous ship by an enforcement team, there's also the risk that the ship just sails away together with the boarding team, so that they also get hijacked. That was expressed by a commander, and I thought, yes, true. So you have entirely new scenarios which were not neither regulated nor like in operations. You didn't face them so far, and of course you could also hijack a ship by cyber means. So deviate cargo. You would maybe not even have to go on board, but you could just use cyber means to hijack it. So yes, entirely new scenarios, lots of challenges for existing law.
Cut the link home and redirect the ship back to your shore.
You can absolutely do that. I mean, actually, there's documentation that Russia, in the Black Sea, there was an exercise going on, some U.S. forces and partner forces, and the Russians spoofed some of the PNT signals, right? Position, navigation, timing, GPS. And all the people on the ships thought it looked like they were parked at an airport on land. So, I mean, how hard would it be to hack into one of these systems and, like you said, Mike, just redirect it to your port, to your little area where you can then offload this precious cargo and, just take over the ship. So, a whole different level of piracy, I think, will come about because of this.
And fun fact, after that incident you just described, they reintroduced in some curricula navigation by using traditional means, because you saw that GPS is maybe not always the most reliable tool to navigate.
Yeah, people whipping out the maps, right? Like, like in Pirates of the Caribbean, they're sitting in the captain's area, like with the maps. Yeah.
Yeah, too mutable. Digital data can be manipulated. So, Sean, what's your take on this?
Well, off of that, I mean, obviously you have the cybersecurity issue, which allows you to hack, and then you cross back into the legal aspect, right? You have different jurisdictions. So I could just take it to where my jurisdiction's most favorable. So, unlike, right now where a pirate has to, board where it is, I can move that thing anywhere I want. So I think that's interesting. The other thing I think is interesting looking at this as this becomes adopted at a higher level, we're looking at this as well at different offshore energy facilities. I'm curious to see what the transition is going to look like when we move to an actual ship that is not made at all for humans to be on it, or crew, because right now what we're doing is we're automating a lot of what already exists, and it's being retrofitted or changed over. So I think it's going to be interesting to look at how these facilities are built, so where they would never have a crew.
But the article that I began reading was a little bit tongue-in-cheek, because it has a little bit of references back to HAL and a few of the other movies. And part of its conclusion is that AI friends are basically sort of cheerleaders of yourself, just helping to encourage you to be a better version of yourself. But it got me thinking, what if you're not the well-adjusted person that we think we are? What if we've had a bad day, or if we've got real negative thought process, or we have real anger issues, and we start talking to the AI? Does the AI encourage us to be better, or does the AI tell us that our sort of myopic view of the world is correct, and encourage us to take on a negative view of it? So the article doesn't really address that. It only talks about the positive things, but I thought I'd bring that up and see what other people thought about AI friends in general. Are they good for us, or do they seem to put impediments in our lives?
So, Henze, what are your thoughts on this?
This was a very interesting article overall, just because I'm heavy in the metaverse, and there's a heavy implication of AI involved in that. Personally, I have some of the same questions that you have, Randy, in terms of if it starts to analyze some of our bad days and some of our terrible human behaviors, right? And start, where's the threshold, and who's controlling that threshold on, hey, is this thought that this person, this friend, the human friend that I have, is this a positive or a negative thought? And should this be added, or should this change my view or my perspective and how I continue to interact with that human friend? I'm speaking from the AI's perspective. So it's always dangerous to walk that fine line. And also, are you creating more of a, I would assume, like a personalized AI, similar to like your personalized internet or search browsing history, things of that nature, as opposed to something that was global and feeding from everyone's negativity or positivity, however you have it. But it just begs the question to, like, where's that fine line? Because we have conscious to know what's right and wrong. So where's the conscious being implemented on some of these AI technologies? That's just my thoughts on it.
Yeah, when I read it, I didn't see it as much different in a way than what's already happening in the background, right? So when you're on Facebook, all of a sudden it starts feeding you ads, it starts feeding you information that really just kind of dovetails with your own like cognitive bias. And I feel like in society that's not a good thing that we've seen lately over the last several years. This kind of polarization where people they seek out information that reinforces their own ideas. And if that's what this thing is doing, I don't know that that's a great thing. I agree with both of you. I mean, when I read, oh, they never disagree with you, I literally typed in my notes, cognitive bias, because I think, well, look, I think you all know that diversity of thought is very important. And if all you're doing is feeding your head with information that reinforces the thought process you already have without growing them, I don't know that that's necessarily a good thing. Now, on the other hand, I could see limited therapeutic purposes, but to Randy and Henze's point, I feel like this AI needs to kind of flip the script a little bit, because I agree. I think there are a lot of people out there that have kind of persistent negative thoughts. And so you don't want a robot spewing back negativity to you. Maybe there's a way this robot, when it hears something negative, can reframe it to try to get you in a positive mindset. And I think that would be a very useful kind of social robotics kind of tool. But again, I think it's really interesting and to see where this goes. And it sounds like this author unplugged from it, right? He checked it out. He learned kind of what it did, and then he was smart enough to say, hey, I checked it out, I'm stepping back. But how many people get sucked into this world and never leave it? I don't know. Mike, what do you think?
Yeah, well, I think you had a good point there about this is not that different than what we're already seeing. So I would just say it's a different skin on it, right? So you put an avatar in place of, let's say, a Twitter post, because we know there's AI bots on Twitter. In fact, there's a famous incident where Microsoft let one loose on the world thinking like it would be doing great, and within 24 hours or a very, very short amount of time, it was very racist. And so it was mirroring its environment. Essentially, what happens here is maybe it wasn't even tuned to be seeking those things out. Most likely not, right? But subtle things like neutrality could actually be dangerous, where it's just saying, I'm going to go with the post that gets the most engagement. And the most engagement might actually be a post that most people hate, right? It might be a racist comment from somebody, and most people even disagree with it. But because the only thing it's measuring to determine whether its behavior is good or not is that engagement, now it is mimicking bad behavior.
Over this weekend, I was diving through into the program, typing up all sorts of stuff. In the article, they had that photograph of the mobster. They had another one, a sailboat knitted out of blue yarn, which sounds strange, but
that one looked ridiculously accurate too.
Unbelievably realistic photos, and just playing around with it, crazy stuff about Frank Sinatra and Sophia Loren playing backgammon or anything you want to throw in there. The pictures that were coming out were just astounding. It's just an amazing concept, and it's crazy to see how far this capability is going. Now, Don, I know you've talked to folks about the art community is really up in arms about, is this really art? Is it not? And the concern about displacing artists and other workers that are out there, that's a concern we see across the tech space as this stuff is getting so good. Now, this article, I thought, I don't know, has anyone else played with this?
I have, yeah. And Dream Fusion and Stable Diffusion, and yeah, been playing around with a lot of these actually. So actually, we've done some art. Some of our thumbnails for our channel are done with Dream, which is an app you can download by Wama Dream. Yeah.
I will tell you, I had so much fun with this. There was a similar music program that someone kind of raised, and it's called MuseNet. And you just type in different artists, and it will combine music into a new type of style. A couple that we did were Adele and Mozart combined, and it produces like a new musical score for you that kind of combines those styles. We also did Billie Eilish and the Beatles, Talk about some
Oh,
really
wow.
bizarre.
It seems like a conflict.
Yeah, I mean, this stuff is amazing, and for me, that was the point of the article, where it's just this stuff is amazing. The capabilities are getting so quickly getting beyond what we anticipated, but yet there are also some risks.
Yeah, well, I mean, I also think if we bring it back to drones, I mean, this is another path forward, showing us how we can move AI more quickly for end-to-end solutions for our customers. Versus the old way of having a algorithm from NVIDIA or stock Microsoft Azure or Google, and then having an expert having to basically tag and build from its infancy, from toddler to maturity. And now you have these type of programs that are basically taking multiple algorithms, multiple pieces of information, and they're creating those outcomes. So if we looked at railroad inspection, something that we're very heavily involved with, being able to quickly learn railroad inspection standards to be able to make railroads safer, more effective, and not harm on-time performance. I mean, these things have applicability, well past just art.
Yeah, I'll say that.
What were you gonna say?
No, go ahead, Mike.
No, no, actually, you go first.
Okay, in the cybersecurity space, we're seeing this too, which is it's kind of an ironic twist, because in cybersecurity you need both offense and defense, and the offense is the bad actors out there. They're the cyber threats. They're all using AI technology to help them thrust forward their nefarious capabilities. But it's the cybersecurity defense teams that really need the same AI capability to stay on par with or stay a little bit ahead of the adversaries out there. So it's just kind of ironic that this AI technology, these capabilities, are being used on both sides of the aisle for folks to kind of keep things abreast of each other.
Well, actually, let me jump on that a little bit, because this is one of my larger kind of concerns. If you look at the history of kind of like security vulnerabilities in computing, hacking the human is actually usually easier, and a lot of the the world's best hacks are a phone call, and then they get the information they need to get in. So, for example, I sent a laptop out to one of our other producers, and via UPS, he got a text message this morning from USP saying, your address information is incorrect. Please click on this link. So think about the orders that had to go through for that to happen. Somebody either algorithmically or maybe through basic deduction figured out the UPS tracking code system and just incrementally goes through this and then matches that data to a database. But you could easily see one of these AI voice kind of algorithms getting on the phone with him, pretending like it's a service to change the address or get critical information out of him, and now, Bob's your uncle, you're done. Basically, they've threaded a line through that vulnerability. They've hacked the human. And you think about, for elderly people, they won't even see that coming.
For sure. So, this is about government funding for drone inspections of our nation's infrastructure. And, it's $200 million worth of funding over 2 years. $100 million of it's going to go toward, local and state governments to fund the actual performance of drone inspections and to acquire the equipment they need. And if they don't have the expertise to farm it out. And then the other $100 million is going to go to more of an educational piece, actually, to support universities and other sorts of training programs for training drone pilots and other support roles and things of that nature. So I think it's a really exciting bill. It passed the House. There's a companion bill pending in the Senate right now. It's expected to pass with bipartisan support and hopefully get signed by the White House. But it's just exciting anytime we see funds actually flowing into the industry, and just particularly exciting to see sort of it flowing down not just into ops but into training up the workforce as well.
Well, what I was going to say is what's exciting to me is that this thing is bipartisan already, like in the House, because in today's environment, having any issue where both sides lock arms is, I think, a very significant feat. And I think it speaks volumes about the industry and how folks are thinking about it, that they are locking arms on this. So yeah, and shout out to AUVSI. I know this was in their autonomous blog. They were one of several groups that are advocating for this particular bill. So yay. I think that's wonderful. And I thought it was interesting, Todd, and I'd love your thoughts on this too, and Mike's. Just kind of scanning through this bill. And by the way, everybody, it's not a long bill if you want to like look it up yourself. I always tell people, don't just read the article or the blog, go right to the text, read it for yourself. But what it says is that grant recipients must use domestically manufactured drones that are made by companies not subject to Chinese influence and or control. So again, another significant thing. So now we're talking, as you know, Todd, right? We had the DoD fiscal year 2021, right? The ban that was codified in the law, for the DoD. Recent action by the DoD under what section was it? Section 1260H of that same act, where the DoD has to publish companies that fall under this umbrella. And they just literally in the last week put DJI on that list. So now you're seeing this like possibly expanding into law for other sectors beyond the military. So, I would love to hear, Mike's thoughts, your thoughts on that.
Well, this is the kind of soft pressure I prefer to see as opposed to like outright bans. I think this makes sense because if you absolutely have to use the tool that works and there's no other tool available, then you should be able to consider that. And all right, that means you forfeit this money. So there's a balance there, right? Also, it allows any money into the sector, I think, will help move things forward. It's critical that we get rid of the dull, dirty, and dangerous jobs around inspection. Infrastructure inspection is definitely one of the most dangerous jobs out there that you could possibly imagine. And then also there's just more coverage when you use drones. So this is kind of like a no-brainer in terms of our ability to actually maintain our infrastructure, which everybody refers to as crumbling these days. So if we're ever going to make it so that people just don't throw that word around when describing our nation's infrastructure, we're going to have to repair it and we're going to have to assess it. So any money to that effort is definitely necessary. That's kind of where I'm at on it. And like I said, I'm really kind of more happy to see this than kind of people reactively banning things without research or, cause. This has cause and incentive, and that's what I'd like to see.
Absolutely, Mike. And just to elaborate on your point, I like the soft pressure too. It's Congress exercising the power of the purse, as they often do, and so I'm a fan of that approach as well. Generally,
just a strange turn of events where Elon seemed to be demanding that he's now get paid for the Starlinks he so generously gave away, which is almost like classic Silicon Valley, like I'll put it in your house and then I'll upcharge later kind of tactics. I don't know if that was the original intent or they were literally just staring down the barrel of a budget after a rash decision that seemed like good PR at the time, which if I have to like put some weight on which one it was, I'd probably put it on the latter because that actually seems to be the pattern for this dude at this point. I think he was very, very fortunate, lucky, and smart early in his career, and it just seems to be that he's taking things for granted, that every decision he makes as a gut instinct will have a good result. The irony in this is that, days later, he's like, fine, I'll give it to you for free, after complaining and comparing it to Lockheed and Northrop Grumman. But the difference is those companies didn't offer it for free in the first place. So I'm not sure that stands. Also, there's no shortage of Silicon Valley nerds that are trying to justify this. I don't understand that kind of like subculture of people that will just defend anything Elon says, no matter how stupid it is. I would just like to see him kind of I don't know, get back to basics a little bit. He's not a dumb dude. He does have his personal problems, but like, I don't know, maybe just stay off Twitter a little bit. That's kind of my take. I'm curious what everybody else's take is on this.
I was going to say, I'd love to hear Sant, because I think this dovetails nicely into his article, where you think about dual use technologies. I mean, we're talking about internet here, right? And he's providing internet for free to Ukraine. And, you know, and then after the fact coming back, and, you know, I think this does tie into acquisition processes and expectations and all of that. So Sant, what are your thoughts here?
Yeah, I'm looking at the value that Starlink is or will provide in the situation like this, right? So yes, he said it's going to be free, but now there's going to be some costs associated with it. But how does that compare in terms of lead times with all the other JA2DC solutions that the other defense contractors are coming up with, and how impervious it is to the China cybersecurity threat? Right, I mean, China is competing with us on the 5G, and they are building their own communications empire. So we got to see where that really stands. I'm not a technocrat in the space, but it will be nice to evaluate Elon's offering and how it evolves, and see what it really does penny to penny for us. And that's what we should. I mean, I think this will be a very strong business decision for the US DoD to make. But you know, that's what entrepreneurship. Not all entrepreneurs get it right first. Not all entrepreneurs are humble. You know, we have seen that right from Edison days. But that's what it'll be. And Elon Musk will not be the first weird entrepreneur, and he'll not be the last weird entrepreneur. So we got to take it on, and we got to look at the solution that these technologies provide, and how they would continue to evolve.
Well, Chris, I think we've seen an unprecedented amount of commercial companies just either giving stuff away and frankly, Elon didn't really give this away. Let's call it what it is. You know, USAID and a whole bunch of countries like Poland, you know, ponying up money to pay for these systems initially, right? So this whole idea that it was free in the first place, I'm not even sure that that's accurate. But the point is, it's really unprecedented for these commercial companies, whether it's Starlink, whether it's a commercial drone company, providing technology outside of normal DoD channels to a conflict. So what are your thoughts here? This is maybe an example of what can happen.
It is an example. It's a little bit ahead of its time. And let me start off by saying Elon's super smart. I agree with most of his decisions. He's a great businessman. And for those who are denigrating him about wanting to make money, let's just do a reality check. Businesses are in the job of making money.
Yeah.
Okay. He owes that to his investors, his stockholders. And profit before patriotism it's been a hallmark of the United States of America since way before when, right? Businesses make money, and to have an illusion that they do anything other than that is kind of ridiculous. Now, how you make money, I think Elon misstepped. To Michael's point, he thought what he would do was hand the DoD something that they could use, and then get a contract out of it. But that's not the way the acquisition lifecycle works. So you can give away free anything to the DoD and they'll go, thank you. And then when you say, do you want this in perpetuity? They say, no, we're going to have to do a compete and a down select, and you may not make it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, exactly. The acquisition process. But, you know, the reality is this is like 75 million a month of ongoing costs right now. So, you know, I think the big misstep
only makes $2 billion, and not on Starlink.
It's 75 million. I'm sorry, but that's one F-35. Everybody over at Raytheon and Lockheed is just laughing, going, "Dude, you're complaining about what?" I mean, they're like, we waste that much money just.
You know, like in terms of public perception, everybody thinks he's giant, or these companies are giant, but that's because he's, you know, a good marketer. But like, you compare that to the traditional military-industrial complex, and it's peanuts.
But if you, so here's the thing, right? If you are a 15-year-old phenom and you want to, and you're just an unbelievable baseball player, and all of a sudden you get drafted and you wake up one day and you're playing for the Yankees and you're 15 years old, guess what?
Yeah.
You're playing in the major leagues. Nobody's going to look at you and go, give him a break. He's only 15. No.
Yeah.
You're getting paid.
But there's
Yeah,
an issue when you
it's a
have
great
you have a
analogy.
big head. I think that's the problem, right? He's, you know, his companies have punched above their weight. This is a cool. I mean, it goes beyond cool. It's a very, very useful technology. And one of the other issues with being like a disruptor in terms of technology is you might be disrupting on price also. So therefore, you're actually
Yeah.
not as profitable as your incumbent competition, who's in. Let's face it, is there a comparative technology that the DoD is even looking at that would provide the same level of service?
Yeah,
At
the
that
only
cost?
thing I can
Probably
complain
not.
about at Elon is at the end of the day, don't whine about being
Yeah,
successful.
that's it. I'm
Amen.
like,
That's
just
it. Like, and
you're
don't
gonna be
make
at
promises
you
you
know,
can't keep, right?
yeah.
Don't tell everybody it's free when you're getting for the first wave of support 15 million from a whole bunch of stakeholders, and now it's costing money, and it's like, oh, you know, what do we? And everybody needs it. It's like you gave them crack cocaine, and then like don't get addicted. Oh, by the way, who's paying for this crack? You
Yeah.
know, so yeah, wow.
Yeah. Well, I guess also as a segue, I'll also talk about maybe the bigger race is between Hyundai, who owns Boston Dynamics and is kind of like second in the row in the EV race, is the true competitor for Tesla. And so this article, which I'll kind of do an intro then, is, you know, a consortium of essentially RoboDog and other robot manufacturers, led primarily by Boston Dynamics, have kind of signed a letter stating that they're not going to weaponize their products. And I find this exciting for two ways. Like, one is just like, that's great to see kind of that leadership coming from these manufacturers. But also the second side, which is from an OEM who, you know, in the past has, you know, seen their products weaponized, and then currently where we're kind of working around that, which is deploying drones, deploying products that kind of reduce the use of force for police. There's a lot more that goes into just signing a letter and saying you're not going to do it. There's a lot of policing that comes down to in the channel, into how the sales actually work. Are you doing, you know, your customer rules and all this stuff? Where, you know, we have seen several robots on that list of companies already with guns strapped to the back of their products in other countries, likely not due to the manufacturer, but just because of that as well. So this is always the gray line that I think all these companies are trying to figure out, which is, yes, publicly Boston Dynamics or these other companies are not going to weaponize their products, but what are they actually doing to actively prevent that? Or, you know, just being, you've seen photos of like a Spot carrying ammo for a soldier. Does that count as weaponization as well? So these are the gray areas that they really need to answer if they want to follow their ethics. That's much more than just signing a letter. But I think this is the start to a much longer conversation that the whole public is going to have, the whole audience is going to have out there as well. And, you know, what exactly does this count as? And, you know, there's a few companies, especially Unitree on that list, that has already been pretty bad at you know, monitoring who actually gets their products and how they weaponize them. And so, you know, my hot take is that 5 years from now, Boston Dynamics is going to look at this and regretting it, either because they've been pushed to weaponize or because people on this list have, you know, not been policing as well as they have.
Well, Aaron, what's your take? I know Dawn probably has a great.
I've got a ton of thoughts, so I'm going to let Aaron go
but,
first.
Yeah, so you definitely get yours out of the way.
Well, I mean, you kind of hit on it a little bit there. When reading this article, it's a great letter, but I really question the meat behind it. You know, what are they going to do once the product is sold and off their shelves, you know, to prevent the drone or the robot from being weaponized? But the other aspect of it is what is weaponization in, you know, this era? You know, the picture shows you know, a gun on the robot, but technology and information is equally vital and critical in security and safety. So if these are equipped with cameras or spectrum, you know, sniffers or things like that, you know, then can start mapping out, you know, repeated life cycles or you know, other elements that
ISR stuff.
Grabbing information that's, you know, equally vital to someone's safety and security. What is weaponization anymore, right? And so that's the element that I'm like, it's a great letter, but I really, you know, again, question their ability to follow through and prevent them from actually being weaponized in the traditional sense, as well as then what about, you know, the future of weapons and that information security aspects, because these drones and these robots can be utilized for that equally as well.
Yeah, so I'm gonna take a contrarian position here and say, what's the big deal, honestly? Like, okay, so there's really positive uses, if you will, for weaponizing a robot, whether it's that Tesla Optimus we just saw, or this dog, in warfare, if it could save lives but achieve the ends. I mean, we do this all the time with technology, right? So again, is the human in the loop? Is the human on the loop? Is this completely autonomous? Who's making the decisions? If I can send a robot in just now, right, more routinely, they're sending robots to like essentially sniff out mines, right? For mine review, for humanitarian purposes, that's a beautiful use of a robot. But if I can send a wave of robots in with guns that can fight a war, and I don't have to have a whole generation of men and women killed, okay. I mean, it just depends on what the use, why they're doing it. What's the intent? Is it in accordance with the law of war, this operation and this weapon? All of these things, at least in warfare, right? So to me, like, it's a legitimate use if it's in accordance with the law of war. Now, where you would be concerned, of course, you're going to always have the criminals, the clueless, the careless, like who gets their hands on these things and what are they using them for? Criminals using them to commit crimes, right? I could see a really great use case. I don't know if you guys remember a couple years ago, there was this crazy guy. I forget. I don't know. It was like Arkansas. Some guy like went on a bus, grabbed a couple kids, took at least one boy in a cave or something. Do you guys remember this? And then the FBI, I think, used a drone at some point. To have a dog like this, that has the ability, if necessary, to use some kind of kinetic force to take that guy out and save that kid in a cave, right? GPS denied, where I don't have to send in my SWAT team. Yay. I mean, like, I'm all for that. So I don't know. I just feel it was just a little bit naive to say, well, and I also think you're cutting off a whole, like, David, you're the market guy. You cut off a whole market and you're going to tell the military, like, you can use our dogs just for ISR, but not for all the other possible purposes that they can, for, good reason, be used for? Then why would I buy from you? I'm going to Ghost Robotics, who didn't sign this letter. So I understand the concern, because you're seeing some maybe nefarious uses of these things. Rex Alexander from 5 Alpha just sent me, ironically, just the other day, a video of a Chinese drone dropping one of these dogs and some statement like, we will drop them in behind, lines of soldiers and surprise them and kill them all, or something like that. Yeah. It's just like, okay, I mean, if we're in a real conflict and that's in the law of war, then okay, you got me. But, it's scary, but, weapons keep progressing, and that's just reality. So I just say do it in accordance with international customs and laws, and then why not?
Well,
but
I think the concern, Don, for this technology is actually the affordability. So I guess the closest analogy would be like pocket nukes, like that I could think of, right? So concern after the fall of the Soviet Union, yes, that actor at the time, we would have expected them, even with the Cold War going on, to operate within, I guess, the law of war, right? But after that falls, and we're not sure what the political stability situation is, now this technology can be proliferated and used by more bad actors who are unconcerned with all the nuances of that. And you can very easily imagine, since these are easy enough to produce, a situation where these could, because there's no risk to the robot, control populations, and they don't even have a fair chance. So in terms of just researchers not wanting their stuff to be used to murder people, that's really, I think, as simply as where this comes from. I mean, you might be able to call that naive, but you can say that if I'm committing to building a piece of technology and I don't want it to be used a certain way, why should I have to allow it just because the market will eventually produce this thing anyway? Well, then let the market produce it and let another person build it. I would assume that's what the researchers that sign this are really kind of saying.
Yeah, I like it's more than an article, is a news, but I like this one because of the implication behind. What those guys have done, they have flown a drone remotely through the 4G and 5G network.
Yep.
So now what happened there? We don't like, as an industry or the regulator, the 4G, 5G network because it's maybe not safe enough and subject to a lot of disruption and maybe there's a lot of maybe, but it can work. It can be a second system to recoup any command and control out of that. But what they have done, and there is a little exercise for geography here. They flew a drone in Spain, so you have to know where is Spain on the map, and they have to fly. The pilot was in Spain, and the guy were flying in Latvia. How is Latvia? You have to cross the entire Europe, 3,400 kilometers, 2,000 miles. Two countries which have a 5G and 4G network, heavily investing on things, which is at the border with Russia. That's not innocent, by the way. And they make a fluid perfectly, smoothly, for a lot of kilometers with drones. So they make it possible. They just show that it was possible. We knew it was possible. They just show it. They have to map the system to have to ensure that there is enough control, but there is a lot of latency, and they was able to recoup the latency, meaning the difference between the moment you give your control and the moment you get the drone repaired and accepted the control on that. So what I like about this example is that we have infrastructure already in place that can do something. Maybe the FAA or the other regulator would like to have something, but at least it's a good one to stabilize. We don't have to invent the wheel. We can reuse actual control. Why we come here from France to try to get in touch and make this business trip to see how this works here, because here is an excellent ecosystem, which is one of the test sites out of America, which is the principle is they reuse, this is Ventis, they reuse actual infrastructure, and throughout of this actual infrastructure, they have to do the low altitude control. So we don't have to rebuild as new. It's coming back a little bit to the article from Joanne. Why spending money and bringing new things that are expensive when you can already improve what you have from what you have and make it happening? And I like what about this article is that using actual systems, you can already give a layer. That's not maybe the perfect layer. You will have to complement it with other systems, but you have a good layer to make operations happening. And this is a very inexpensive layer. So inexpensive layers means inexpensive operations, means very productive and very competitive things. So it will be affordable for people. This is really what I like about this article. And when it comes to infrastructures, it's the same thing for drones, because this is the 4G or the antenna infrastructure, but we don't have to invent new vertipads or vertiports. We can reuse buildings. So your example down about Singapore is about that. You don't have to rebuild the building. You just put the structure on top of it. The one behind me is one of those things we are creating here. It's something that you use actual buildings, and then with that, you can put antennas on it. And so you improve the coverage and the low altitude gets ready. So it's really what I like about what those guys have done. And if you are not used to Europe's complication about politics and standards and things, they flow the command and control through Spain, France, Germany, some Benelux, then some Poland, and maybe some other things that they finally arrived there.
Wow.
So that was a good thing. That was a good thing. I think it's a good eyes opening on that and the potential, and to be more courageous to say, okay, let's use what is already existing, and then we ping pong it to make more security or safety.
I love that. Joan, what do you think?
Well, of course, the first question that comes to mind when you mention the trajectory, Eric, of the story in that article is, have they run into, what's happening with their business with the war in Ukraine? Are they able to do this? Are they running it? I mean, they're on the border with Russia. They're in Latvia. I mean, my full disclosure, my paternal grandparents were from Latvia and Lithuania. My maternal grandparents were from Ukraine. So it's especially top of mind for me. But when you talk about them trying to do that path, What's the impact of the war on there?
They don't mention that in the article, and by the way, they are far away from that war, so it's like business as usual there. There's just pressure, obviously military pressure, I guess, around it. But the good thing is that we know that the region can be under some scrutiny and difficulty and disruption for communication, and they were able to do that. So it means that they achieve great technically. So it means it's possible. It's possible. But it's far away from the truth.
Yeah, so their access to the satellites and the technology you talked about latency. Is latency affected by any of the issues related to the war? Because it's in the same neighborhood, you know.
It may have, but it looks like not. That is the good news. And there is I met some time ago a company which is able to go within the way you have transmission through the LTEs, and so they can find a broadband which is faster and not being compromised by anything. It's just pure electronic engineering around that, and I think this is one of the solutions. There is always a band within the band which is protected. If this one is done for maybe operation like that one, that would be perfect. This is just a demo they have done, but when I'm thinking about massive disruptions, and you have the firefighters or the first responders need to get somewhere, and there is no antenna because I don't know, you have a hurricane, all the antennas are down, but the 4G is still existing. They can fly their drone there and see the things. That is what I like about this one. We can have already existing things.
Oh yeah, I was gonna say, to your point, Eric, and both, you know, it's kind of to Joan too. You know, the point is it's one system of many, and I think for, you know, any one of these industries, whether we're talking electric vehicles, whether we're talking drone delivery, whether we're talking, you know, really anything, it's going to be connected, it's going to be multimodal, and there's going to have to be systems of systems. And so to be able to use 5G as one option, but be able to maybe sniff out another connection, as Eric alluded to, if for some reason 5G is not going to work well, there's a company, for example, called Elsight. That's what they do. They're also out of Israel, where they have this Halo solution that sniffs out the best connection. The company here, by the way, was Airborne RF. Thomas Neubauer is the CEO there, also of Demeter. I saw Thomas in Human Form in Las Vegas in September. It was so cool. But I've written about Airborne RF solution that they used here in Drone Life, by the way. So that article is out there. It was called Network Solutions Enabling Complex Drone Operations in Europe. And so they've been working with USpace, which is the UTM, right? The UAS traffic management system regulation and the Gulf of Finland trials and whatnot. This one is really huge. I would agree with Eric. The distance that this one over, the fact that through Airborne RF, they're able to kind of monitor how is that connection going. So that's kind of the point of the software. And they're like this interesting linkage between the telecom communications, the drone providers, and aviation systems. That's what this Airborne RF does. It's like this linkage software. And so really, really cool that they were able to do this. I love what Europe has been doing, Eric. I've been a huge fan. I've been saying for years that Europe is ahead of us in so many respects when it comes to really effectuating drone operations on a repeatable, scalable way.
And this type of collaboration really provides that type of interaction for them. So I think it's really interesting to see, you know, now NASA is really interested in M2N operations where you have, you know, we're really trying to figure out how we can have as few operators as possible operating as many drones out there as possible. So, you know, so we can bring this to scale in a variety of different ways. So I just thought the article just shed light on what NASA is doing. We do a lot of work with NASA as a company, and I think it's just fascinating. And we could go on and on about what NASA is doing in the drone space, but this was just, I thought, a really good example, a good primer.
Yeah, exciting stuff. What do you think, Maggie?
I agree with Matthew. I'm part of a NASA initiative for a UAS integration. And I love the fact that they're reaching out, monthly in asking the leader of the industries, what their perspective is. And they really are taking it hard. One of the other things that I love about this, the sharing of information, it used to be that NASA, remember in the 60s, they were very hush-hush about their technology. They wanted the recognition of being forefront, thinking, but sharing that information, especially quote with the Russians and such, they didn't want to share that. They just wanted the first one to be up on the moon, and it's different now. It absolutely is different now that they're open to that, and I think also the FAA is getting more and more where they want to get a feeling for what the general public is thinking, not just our pilots, but in general what the government's thinking, what the industry's thinking, what the general public is thinking. So I think it is very, as we all believe, networking and gathering information from different perspectives is really the best way to grow and to share that information. I think that nowadays you see a lot of NDR where, we can't talk about this and we can't talk about that. I think it's almost more harmful than it is helpful. So that's my opinion on it. So it was a great article. Thank you for sharing that, Matthew.
Thank you.
Well, I was going to say I learned something here, Matthew, from this article, because the symbol small m big N,
yes,
I did not know stood for kind of one-to-many operations. Maybe I should have known that. I'm sure it's floating around in the scientific journals and in the halls of NASA, but it's the first time I saw that being used, and frankly, it's almost one that makes no sense. M, you think would be many to N1, but whatever. Look, I didn't make it up, but I did learn about it, so that's really cool. And this, look, hats off the zip line. I know we talk a lot about NASA, and obviously I'm a huge fan of NASA. Fun fact: NASA PK will be on our Dawn of Drones at the very, very end of the year, so we're real excited about that for the NASA end of year roundup with the FAA. But Zipline, man, I mean, they've been doing incredible things. Everybody heard early on all the stuff they were doing in Africa, and now, Japan, Africa being Ghana, Rwanda in particular, they're doing things in Arkansas, and now with NASA on this one-to-many. And, to Matthew's point, the collaboration that NASA is doing here, it's not really new in this kind of triple helix sense, because they've had the Space Act for a while, and this is under a Space Act agreement, which is almost like an other transaction authority, gives them a lot of leeway to work with a lot of different kinds of organizations, nonprofits, companies, individuals, academics. So really cool that they're leveraging the heck out of that Space Act for drones and for advanced air mobility. And yeah, I had another thought, and I guess my only other comment is, they throw out the word air taxis in this article, and I think anybody in the advanced air mobility or electric vertical takeoff world, they cringe when they hear that, because it's like, we're not a flying car, like we are an aircraft, we are an electric vertical takeoff landing aircraft. And so, I think it's that whole thing with language and what to Maggie's point, in common society, people think flying cars. There's only a handful of people actually making real flying cars. I think Airspeeder is one of them, and they're going to be on this show in a couple of weeks, which is exciting. But we're talking about real aircraft, and when we're talking about having people on them, we just talked about that 10-year timeline with Metaverse. Oh boy, having one pilot flying multiple aircraft with passengers on them. I don't know, Mike, if you'd even say 10 years. I feel like we're beyond the 10-year time frame for one-to-many for what they're referring to as flying taxis. I think we're closer to that with small drones. Maybe even some of the larger drones, but we're not even there yet for that. And by the way, real quick fun fact, The FAA in their Beyond Visual Line of Sight Aviation Rulemaking Committee report, there's a large portion of that dedicated to this idea of one to many. Again, Matthew brought up a great point that to make this scalable, this industry, you need to be able to do that. You can't have 20 pilots each flying their own drone over a cornfield for precision agriculture. All right, just kind of going with the Veterans Day theme a little bit. So, by the way, thank you all to all of our veterans out there. You included, of course, Chris. I saw this article and I thought it was really interesting for a whole host of reasons. So, the United States Navy has, for the very first time, actually installed a 3D printer that is capable of producing metal components on an amphibious ship. This thing weighs 4,700 pounds. It is 6.5 feet tall, 68 inches front to back, and 8 feet wide. So this thing is a monster that they put on this ship. They also added, by the way, a polymer-based printer that's only a measly 100 pounds. So they added two 3D printers onto the ship to effectively maintain vessels while at sea. Now, lots of things, lots of parts go south. It's a harsh environment at sea. Maintaining vessels is a difficult thing. What I thought was interesting about this, well, a lot of things about it. There's a lot of limiting factors. Number one, the size of this thing. You can't put this on every possible military platform, just given the size of it. The second thing is, that I found intriguing is some of the polymers or some of the powders, the metal powders that they have to use to create this are actually very volatile, and so you can't put them on ships. It could be dangerous. So there's that. But the thing, because we dwell quite a bit in the uncrewed aircraft system world, UAS world. There's been so many drone companies kind of targeting this. Let's just call it ship-to-ship resupply market, if you will, or ship-to-shore resupply market. That I wonder how ultimately, once they perfect this 3D printing, maybe make it smaller, it's the swap, the size, weight, and power shrinks down like technology tends to do in a rapid fashion. How's that going to play with these drone companies that have kind of built their whole model around this idea of being able to rapidly deploy parts, for example, like they would be creating with this 3D printer, between vessels. So, I think it's really intriguing, really cool. It's a great use of 3D printing. It makes a lot of sense. It'll just be interesting to see whether it displaces some of these other advanced technologies that we're targeting this, or there's maybe a good synergy. I don't know. I would love to hear Chris's thoughts about that.
That's interesting. Yeah, hopefully they don't replace all of the ship-to-ship and ship-to-shore work that's coming up. But maybe it could be a different model. You have a hub on one of the larger air carriers, and you're printing everything you need there. If there's a ship pretty far out, then you can have drone delivery systems as a hub and spoke model just out at sea.
Oh, that is brilliant! Actually, I love that idea.
I think the more efficient and more self-sufficient we are out that remote, the better. So love that they're using 3D printing. I love 3D printing. I definitely did a bunch of projects like that when I was at university and played with all kinds of 3D printers. But it'd be interesting to see what parts they're creating as well with these massive metal 3D printers. Obviously, as a ship, there's a lot of metal and equipment on there, but it'd be really impressive or interesting to know what they need it for.
Well, they were saying, kind of the auxiliary parts for some larger systems, for example, exterior hand wheels that get damaged from repeat use or objects knocking into them was the example they gave. Valves as an example. I guess it takes days. Having been in the Air Force, I know how the procurement system works and how it takes a while to get things, but they're saying it takes days just to have a request fulfilled and then the items delivered to the ship, which maybe you don't have days, to wait around if it's a significant part that, that got damaged or something. But Lisa, I also noticed in this article a little bit about workforce development, right? So here we are again. We're bringing this new technology on board, literally on board. And it's like, all right, now we got to train up some sailors to be 3D printers, you know? So I know you're very involved also with the Commercial Drone Alliance on that workforce development side. I'd love to hear your thoughts on that, or just kind of on this technology in general.
Yeah, sure. I mean, we're seeing the same thing in the aviation side, right? Where you used to have kind of the traditional aviation workforce and the tech workforce as kind of separate streams, and now they're converging. And you have to be an expert at aviation, but you also have to be an expert at tech. And and so there's this whole new opportunity for all of these new jobs where you're bringing kind of these different knowledge bases and different skill sets to bear. I think it's a great opportunity. I also think it's a great opportunity on the tech and sailing side, or tech, marine side. I will say, don't 3D printers also make drones?
Yeah, they could. Yeah.
Yes, right?
Make the drone to fly the part. I love it. One-stop shop.
Exactly. And then there are drones that use 3D printers. So, I think you could see lots of synergies. And we're seeing that across the drone industry as well, where you have different technologies. I like to talk, think about when cell phones were first invented, do we have any idea that we'd be using them to do our banking and our emails and our, to talk to, in addition to talking to our friends, and also our shopping and ordering our groceries on our cell phones, right? Who knows what the use cases for drones or 3D printers are going to be 10 years from now? We could be having the same conversation, and it's literally all combined, and the tech goes, so it's really, really exciting just to see all of this evolve.
Totally. I don't know how they wedged this thing onto that ship, because I mean, I wasn't in the Navy, but I've toured a number of ships, and it's really close quarters already on there. I mean, they designed those ships to use every square inch of space, so to put something that large on there, that's pretty significant, I think. Mike, what are you thinking?
Well, just thinking what you just said, and ventilation, right? So
yeah, true.
3D printers give off some noxious fumes. I would imagine if a metal 3D printer would be worse on that front. But yeah, to go to what Chris was saying, it'll depend on which part, right? So this is probably a stopgap for parts that aren't easily acquired or take time. But there's limits to additive printing in general. The types of shapes you could do that would probably be even more limited with metal, because you can't shave things off. There's additional work, and then you have to worry about reliability, because this thing was put together drop by drop rather than being formed properly. I'm kind of curious as to why they don't have subtractive presses, or do they? Anything that could do like milling to create parts on these ships? Like, why did they? I don't
know what they've got on there, Mike. I mean, they were talking about are using these occupational specialists, which would be relevant, I think, to your question. Machinist, repairman, a hull technician, and a damage controlman. So,
maybe they're just attacking the problem on a completely different plane, and 3D printing is just the coolest new kind of toy. But I don't think it'll replace all the other things you were talking about, because 3D printing does not create things in bulk. Subtractive you could get pretty fast, but it takes a minute to print something in 3D. So this is probably, just to fill the gap for stuff that's kind of critical, but we don't want to wait any longer than we already are waiting to kind of fix.
I love AAM, I love UAM, this is me till I die. But when I heard that 75% of people had not heard about flying cars, I kind of just realized that we are in a bubble. We're in our own little bubble here, and we need to step out of it for this industry to really succeed. And there's 5 of those big barriers, 6 of the big barriers that we need as an industry to overcome for flying taxis to exist in cities: certification, regulation, noise. We need the infrastructure to be there as well. Batteries aren't quite there yet, but they're getting there. And the last one is public acceptance. And it feels to me as though this is the final piece of the puzzle that they want to bring in, but hasn't been focused on. initially. And I find that kind of baffling that we haven't brought the public in earlier as the biggest stakeholder of this industry. Not only to allow this to happen, but for them to want this to happen, for us to have customers, to have adoption, so that we can have flying cars as part of our everyday society. And so I think it was a bit of a wake-up call, and I kind of using the podium that is Full Crew to talk about it, to say, guys, we need to really address this, and probably in 2023, I get that certification's on a path and it's continually changing, and regulations can be doing the same, but this is one that we can start affecting now. How do we get people to fall in love with it? So that's probably one of the big comments I want to kind of just raise here today, is some ideas. And I'm absolutely amazed by Jamal's article to be able to bring in personal air mobility vehicles, because that's what we're big believers in at Airspeeder. They're not only one of the earlier markets that you can actually not so reliant on those big 6 hurdles of being completed, but it's a great way to inspire, a great way to fall in love again with what we always thought flying cars could be. So we at Airspeeder, we're big fans of obviously racing. We know racing was one of the first applications in the automotive world. It's the first application in aviation with things like the Schneider Trophy. And so we're here to be able to say that for flying cars, we think it's probably one of the first applications. And so whether you look at the recreational hobby vehicles like Jetson, or if you look at the motorsport vehicles that we're creating with Airspeeder, they're there to be able to say to a next generation, not only is this technology ready today, and we're already racing in crazy environments, which is brilliant, but the acceptance of it, the acceptance of it is reliant on the awareness. And for awareness, we need to get that far and wide. We need young, old, guys, girls, everyone to be thinking about flying cars and how they can embrace in their day-to-day, whether it's your personal air mobility or whether it's you're watching on TV as the Formula One in the skies, whatever it is. And so, for me, it's just raising a bit of awareness on how we get that 75% figure lower, how we get 100% people knowing about flying cars. And and so open to the thoughts on the table.
I think Jamar's up next.
Yeah, that's good stuff. I think that definitely we have to get kind of the linguistics figured out, because and our challenge is when we explain it, when we were using the term flying cars, people envision like they're driving, on the 805 and then their car sprouts wings and takes off and can just kind of fly from there, when really we're not talking that kind of experience. At least I don't think we are, for this thing. So it's really, as you said, understanding what's the best way to kind of nomenclature that's going to attract them. And in cars, obviously, everybody relates to that, right? But it's like we have to then redefine what a car is, I guess, at this point, because people's minds do go to most often, 4 wheels, highway, traffic, doors open up, they become like Knight Rider or whatever with wings, and you can fly away now, kind of deal. And it's a different world. But yes, it's interesting. I'm excited just when I think about the concept of humans being able to get to and fro faster, more efficiently, just all this, that comes along with it from the emergency standpoint. But then, like you said, the recreational standpoint, I can't wait to buy tickets to one of these things, to go see the pros, Team A versus Team B, flying these things around in some big open airfield stadium kind of concept. Yeah, sign me up all day.
Yeah, VIP passes from Jack all around,
yeah,
right?
exactly.
Our crewmates here. So I just wanted to say,
contact information in the chat.
Yeah, exactly. We'll talk offline.
Terms and conditions to apply. Yeah.
I wanted to give a shout out to NASA for at least trying, Jack, because they've been doing this, they're calling it the national campaign, which is very US focused, but still they've been holding these meetings all open to the public. I think hundreds of people are dialing in, but it's hundreds of science nerds that are into this, right? So I agree with you. And this article, the hardest thing is kind of crossing that Rubicon to mainstream media. Okay. Mm-hmm. This has been our challenge because, the people watching us right now, I guarantee it, are people in the tech industry, people that are following all of us on LinkedIn, or, are fans of Airspeeder, Promo Drone, whatever. It's, I always say we're so good at FUBU, right? For us, by us, when it comes to marketing and media. I think the toughest thing is to get into broadcast media. Now, we saw 60 Minutes had Whisk on there. 2 months or 3 months ago, whenever that was. And, everybody was all excited. It was kind of a one and done. I haven't seen anything further from it. That was great. The reason why I was at Archer is because I'm actually filming a PBS documentary on eVTOLs and drones, which I'm really excited about, because that will be, now that's PBS and it's going to be eventually naturally broadcast, but it's kind of getting onto Discovery Plus, because when you think about, let's just talk about BattleBots, right? So here's a bunch of folks that create these robots and drones that blow each other up in an arena, right? But once they got on Discovery Plus, then people started really watching them. Same Drone Racing League, another great example. So I agree with you, Jack. I think the racing application is a great way to get people excited about it. All these other applications, the passenger ones, how do you do that? You need the outlet. You need the good news stories and people willing to tell them and listen to them. And I think that's been our biggest challenge.
You brought up a great article for us, and this was type of doomsday scenario I never could have imagined, but it seems like they dealt with it. Can you tell us what's going on?
Yeah. Oh, I'm on this side.
Yeah.
Yeah. No. This is a an interesting article, and this isn't new. This is stuff that keeps happening and it's reoccurring and it's just starting to make the news. So I thought this was an important article to bring here. So thanks, Don, for inviting me to talk about this a little bit. But what happened here was an anomaly with GPS, and it wasn't initially known what caused it, but the first reports that came out were actually notice to airmen, so to pilots, that was released that told them that there was some GPS interference. And really what happened was GPS was blocked in a 40 all the way up to 40,000 feet, which is as high as you will fly on an airliner, and in a 50 nautical mile radius around the Denver airport. So we were seeing official reports starting to come out, or actually warnings to the pilots that there were going to be issues with their GPS. It was affecting something known as the Wide Area Augmentation System. Some of you know it as WAAS, as well as the Ground-Based Augmentation System, GBAS, which helps GPS precision. And even perhaps more scary is the TCAS system that's equipped on these aircrafts, which prevents collisions. So the collision avoidance systems were also affected. So this was the article that was dropped around August time, but this incident actually happened in January, and it just didn't become publicly talked about until a group in Stanford was doing research on this and started publishing articles, and several universities started publishing articles on it. And at that point, that's when the government went ahead and came out and started talking about this incident. And so that's please, Don.
Yeah, I want to jump in here. First of all, this strikes very close to home for Jonty and me both. I mean, we live, very close to Denver here in Colorado. This is absolutely frightening. I just want to fill in a couple more facts to kind of set the stage here. This was a GPS problem for 8,000 square miles in the Denver area that occurred on January 21st. And Josh, to your point, DHS, Department of Homeland Security, is investigating this. This article said they would come out with a report called GPS Interference Happens in October. I did Google that. I have not found it. So if that report was supposed to come out, it has not yet, unless one of you guys found it. But this incident lasted for 33.5 hours. And what really, all of those things you said, Josh, scared the heck out of me. But the one, it almost sounds like not only was the GPS signal jammed, it sounds like it was almost spoofed in some respects, because there was one person that, the NASA has that system, the ASRAS, the Aviation Safety Reporting System. A bunch of people, bunch of pilots had reported things exactly around this time frame. So there's kind of a correlation there. And I feel like I'm trying to look at my notes here. It was so bizarre where the person, didn't know, like, not only didn't know where they were, but it was almost like, I don't know. I'm sorry. I can't find it in my notes. I took very thorough notes and I'm just like not finding it here. But it was almost like they thought they were actually somewhere else or something. When I read this article, I was thinking not only were these signals jammed up, but they were possibly being spoofed and oh, I know what it was. They got some notification. It actually told them to avoid another aircraft that didn't exist, that wasn't there. And that's when I was like, holy shnikes, whoever's doing this, they're like testing everything out to make sure that they can not only jam, but maybe spoof things too. And that's crazy. I would love to get Jonty's thoughts on this.
Well, I've seen things like this happen overseas. Like North Korea is infamous for spoofing and jamming GPS along the Korean border. So you have huge shipping containers with their GPS tracking being located in the middle of a town somewhere, as opposed to out at sea.
Wow.
We are always concerned about things like interference, like the light squared interference. Is that going to terrestrial signals going to interfere with GPS? But this was not anything indicative of something like a little bit of interference on the fringes there. This was a huge area of impact. So that one, when I read this article, I'm kind of like, whoa, this sounds like things that happen elsewhere, not here in the United States.
Right. Traditionally, wide area spreads like this are jamming incidents versus spoofing. And, the spoofing effects or the spoofing symptoms can appear in jamming incidents such as this one. So like the TCAS, maybe we're talking about the same thing when I mentioned the TCAS. That is the collision avoidance systems on the aircrafts, commercial ones especially, and they could give false indications that there are aircrafts in their path, especially if their GPS is off and their position is reported to the system at a different, the inertial start to drift or whatever starts to happen. Some weird things can start happening. And to answer your other question, Don, about like if we found that article, I haven't found that article that Department of Homeland Security is supposed to put out or that report, but it is known, or at least it was reported by the government, that they're actually not going to release the identity of the source. But for the Denver incident, I believe they did figure out the source, but they are not going to disclose that.
Hey everybody, welcome back to Your Full Crew. I'm Don Zoldi, one of your co-hosts.
Hey, and I'm Mike Peel, your other co-host, and we've got some great articles we're going to be talking about today. We're going to be talking about Boston Dynamics' lawsuit against Ghost Robotics. We're going to be talking about, oh my god, I forgot the second article.
You don't have to go in order, Mike. We know we're talking also about
autonomous
avatars in Japan, convenience stores.
Yes, that's the second article. My apologies. We're going to be talking about autonomous vehicles making it onto the threat list. And please stay tuned to the end because we're going to be playing around with ChatGPT-3 Live. So it's a revolutionary type of AI writing assistant and coding assistant. So we're going to check that out at the end. And we've got some amazing guests to talk about these topics. Honestly, this is action-packed today. We're going to start with our first guest, Karen DeMeo. Karen, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Hi, Mike and Don and Kimberly. It's great to be here today. I really appreciate you having me on as a guest. I'm the CEO and founder of Aero DeMeo, which is a consulting company. I advise clients on issues related to uncrewed and advanced emerging technologies in the aviation industry. I work mostly with companies and clients in the drone space. It includes operators and manufacturers, related technology and robotics. And I've been in aviation for 30 years, part of it as working with the federal government as FAA, part of the regulatory branch of aviation, and then also in commercial industry. I focus. My early years was focused on research and early strategy integration of drones into the airspace for the military and commercial. But today, I help my clients kind of bridge the gap between their fast-paced technology advancements and the much slower-paced regulatory and policy needs of the industry. So I'm so excited to be here today. Thank you.
And she forgot to say that she's the 2021 Women to Watch Women in Drones Leadership Award recipient. That was Saberwing, I think, Saberwing Aircraft sponsored that award. So.
Yes, thank you, Dawn. My reign's almost over. We're about to
handing the crown soon.
Yeah, I'm very excited about that. So yeah, thank you.
Yeah, and I'm proud to have known Karen for over half a decade now. So, Ramon Roche is in the chat. Say hi to Ramon. And actually, we've got a mutual friend as our second guest today, Kimberly McGuire. So, Kimberly, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Yes, thanks. Yeah, first of all, thank you for inviting me. And yeah, I'm Kimberly. I'm a robotics engineer at Bitcraze. It's a small company in Sweden which makes the small quadcopter called the Crazyflie.
Right so cool.
So yeah, I'm actually from the Netherlands myself. I followed my studies there all the way up to my PhD at the Technical University of Delft. And I got my PhD on the topic of swarm exploration with pocket-sized drones, like the Crazyflie. Yeah, so that's in my free time. I love food and traveling. I do quite some video gaming as well. In terms of traveling, I love Japan. Anything about Japan. That's also where I met Mike at Roscon. So, and then one thing led to another, and now I'm here. So I'm very glad to be here.
Yeah, and we'll be talking about Japan later. So lots of coincidences today. I'm truly excited. But the first article is actually from you, Kim, about Boston Dynamics suing Ghost Robotics.
Yeah,
so what's going on here?
Yeah, it's actually an interesting article. It's, I think, already a couple of weeks old, so it's not the newest news out there. But Boston Dynamics it's already like quite long out there. So they're really known for the robot Spot, Big Dog, Atlas. You probably already know the viral videos that they sometimes bring out. So and Ghost Robotics is a smaller company, a little bit newer, and they make robots like Spot, like on the picture right there. So they kind of look similar. So Boston Dynamics is suing Ghost Robotics for the design, and in the article they actually list a couple of patents over there, which I'm not a patent lawyer myself. I'm in no position to evaluate it, but I have heard some stories that they might be just a little bit too generic for the design. But still, I'm not the expert here. Interesting thing actually is there's already some quadruple robot companies out there, but they decided to sue Ghost Robotics, and Ghost Robotics has gone viral a while ago by putting a gun on one of their robots and posting a video about it. So there was a lot of talk about that, and people are against that. And Boston Dynamics have been co-signing a letter together with Open Robotics, Unitree, which is another one, like a similar robot design they also design, and I think Anabotics and a couple of other ones, to be against the weaponization of robotics in general. Don't put weapons on robots, they don't want that. So they're kind of like, maybe that's not really the reason why the patent design was maybe not necessarily the reason why they sued Ghost Robotics, but perhaps it's because of their viral video where they put a gun on a Ghost Robotic platform. So, yeah, that's kind of the background.
Selective lawsuit is what you're saying, or at least saying is a possibility. Dawn, you wanted to say something?
No, I want Kimberly to finish her thought, and then I wanted to jump in real quick.
Of course, yeah. I think that's pretty much all I can say. So, of course, the article itself is about the lawsuits, but it's more of I'm just kind of trying to connect the dots a little bit together. So perhaps not completely about the patents, but actually about the fact that Boston Dynamics is against weaponization.
Well, I'm sure that no pun intended in a way added fuel to the fire, but Yeah, so let's talk. So we talked about that a couple of full crews ago. That open letter and the fact Ghost Robotics sells almost exclusively to the military. So putting a weapon on that can make sense. I mean, look, we've been weaponizing drones forever. They're robots. But you know, with what I found interesting, there's a long history here. So this wasn't just a lawsuit out of nowhere. There were multiple, you know, basically notifications, if you will, that Boston Dynamics gave to Ghost Robotics. Let's see. First of all, there was kind of an initial letter where they sent, you know, saying, hey, you should review our patents, you should make sure you're not infringing. And then they sent kind of a specific notification letter for the patent infringement before filing the lawsuit. I think some of that's prerequisite to filing the lawsuit, but all of this predates that open letter. I think that open letter, you know, that like I said, I think that's connecting the dots. I think that's even more reason for Boston Dynamics maybe to have some animosity with Ghost Robotics. But lots of, to your point, Kimberly, lots of interesting things for the IP we're talking about here. So it was robotically negotiating stairs was one of the patents.
Right, I saw that one. That felt like kind of like thin, like just put it out there, see if they'll, you know, rubber stamp it.
Yeah, like a perception and fitting for a stair track, or like, you know, screw actuator for a legged robot ×2. There were 2 patents about that. So really interesting because Ghost Robotics fired back. And they kind of use the same language, almost like, oh, they've been watching us, and they've decided to, you know, sue us. Ghost Robotics was formed. So first of all, Boston Dynamics was formed by an MIT. It was a spinoff of an MIT project, and they've been going for, like you said, making all these robots for 20 years. Just released the Spot in 2020. Ghost Robotics came about conversely in 2015. Founded by the PhD research of a University of Pennsylvania professor, so another prestigious, you know, Ivy League school in this case, and they had filed a patent for a battery-powered dynamic legged robot called the R-Hex, which was filed and received, or it was received in 2001. So how this is going to play out, I don't know, but we're seeing this a lot in technology where companies have similar products, and then the lawsuits are flowing, like we see Archer and Whisk. I know Karen's familiar with that as well. So Karen, I'd love to hear your thoughts.
Yeah, no, I mean, I'm not an attorney either, but I found it really fascinating, and I feel like maybe we're starting to, it's the beginning of a trend that we might see in the drone space and, you know, in the eVTOL space. Mostly the, you know, litigious activities have been the industry versus sort of the government or, you know, entities as we're trying to build the space up. But I certainly see it evolving into, you know, something like this where, all right, once we start, you know, being able to move companies out to scale, and the economy starts getting infiltrated with these technologies, we're going to see the industry turning on itself and, you know, start suing each other. I remember when I was in the FAA back in the early days of the drone work, it was just fascinating to me that before there were really any commercial operations, you know, we started seeing these, I mean, dozens and dozens of patents being filed by, you know, some of the bigger drone companies, and they were all ideas, right? We hadn't seen any of it. And, you know, in the aviation world, it really was kind of an anomaly because we didn't see things like that. So I think it's, you know, a sign of the times to come. It's the first of many. I do work with a client that, you know, works with Boston Dynamics because drones and robotics are starting to go hand in hand too. And, you know, it's concerning, like, what impact is this going to have going forward? We certainly don't want innovation to slow down or stall anymore. You know, we want companies to thrive. But, you know, I get it. Intellectual property is important. It's the core of business. So, you know, I think it's just going to be fascinating to watch it roll out. And I'm just thankful that I'm not a patent attorney.
Cisco PD. But what happened here was San Francisco had decided they were going to allow, in late November, a city's board of supervisors gave local police, quote, the right to kill a criminal suspect using a teleoperated robot should they believe that not acting would endanger members of the public or the police. A little more than a week later, after a bunch of protests, they rolled back that decision. It's right now under further review. So the jury is out. Okay, public outcry. Lots of concerns here. Okay, I'm going to roll through these super quick, and then I'd love to hear everybody's thoughts on this. Number one, deciding whether or not to pursue an action to take a life. You need contextual information, context. They're saying this robot will not give the details needed to make that call. Number two, disassociation between decision and action. The human makes a decision, but somehow they're suggesting it's disassociated from the robot taking that action, which I frankly disagree with both of those premises, but love to hear you guys, your thoughts. The third one is, oh, look, we're militarizing the police, making it a military. That's a concern. And last but not least, this is going to harm the police force's ability to interact with the community in other ways. You know, like robots in hostage situations sometimes are used to deliver phones. So is someone going to pick up that phone? Maybe they'll think the robot's going to shoot them or blow up or something along these lines. So those were kind of the concerns raised. But again, like, I'm going to pass this over to Graham next. This idea that it's disassociated, this idea that there's not enough information to make a decision. First of all of these situations are highly dynamic and stressful. And humans are probably some of the worst people in those scenarios to remember facts, to identify witnesses, etc. There's research on this. But here's the key. Anybody that's worked in an ops center using a drone knows full well that not only can you see everything pretty dang well, better than just from your naked eye, and especially you have more than one on site, which they will. This will all be networked. It won't be just like one dog. Number two, there's a whole room full of people. So in other words, it's not one cop making this call. There's going to be a lawyer there probably. You know, like if they do this right, this will have all kinds of protections built in that are not present in a scenario where you have a police officer or two on a scene with a gun that could just as easily shoot somebody.
Yeah.
So Graham, what do you think?
Yeah, you brought up some great points there. I mean, I'm just trying to sort of unpick all of that. I think my initial gut feeling is a cultural one. You know, the difference between doing that in the UK and doing that in the US. You know, there's in the UK that just wouldn't happen. You know, everyone would spill their tea. They wouldn't be very pleased.
Well, aren't guns illegal?
Yeah, guns are illegal.
Okay, well,
right?
yeah,
So,
I mean, yeah.
yeah, but you raised a good point in so much as how do you break that? How do you break that apart? In the US, obviously, a policeman is authorized, correct me if I'm wrong, to take life if you know.
Yeah, usually
if he needs to.
Yes.
Yeah. So, you know, if now you're handing it over to a robot and they can process that information, I suppose it's what you're actually turning it into is judge and executioner all within split seconds. I don't know. It doesn't quite sit too comfortably with me. I think what you could do is a mix of the two, i.e. have a policeman on scene with the dog that would be collecting the data and the information that would essentially back up his decision-making cycle. But yeah, I think it all revolves around, you mentioned towards the end there, how that is rolled out. If it's rolled out correctly, then absolutely, I think it's just another tool in the tool bag of the law enforcement.
And just remember, there is a human here in the loop. This is teleoperated. This isn't an autonomous killer robot. That's where the title is wrong. You know, this is no different than having a gun in your hand versus having a gun on a dog that you have a remote controller to. That's my position. But Sonette, what do you think?
Very interesting article. I'd agree with you. The whole killer robot headline is seeking sensation. So similar to drones, I think obviously drones also have their place, dull, dirty, dangerous type of work. And this is then obviously a very dangerous type of work, law enforcement, especially in the States, where, you have your right to bear arms. And a lot of people are fully using that right to its full extent. So in South Africa, it's the same. We also have the right to own firearms. The police, they are armed. They also have the right to use lethal force in certain situations. So I think I agree with you, Dawn, that if applied correctly, I think there are advantages to be gained. If I just quickly think about when you have someone out there in the field that need to make the split decision about, well, it's me or you, so I have to use lethal force to defend myself in a situation where the perpetrator or the other person is armed. I think it takes that subjectivity away and maybe brings a bit more objectivity into the situation, because number one, the person operating that robot is not in harm's way. So I think already it skims a lot of that subjectivity and that, well, let me take you out before you take me out type of situation. And so I think it will actually maybe even lead to less lethal force having to be used. And I think also in that situation, so you said in your operations center, it's not one person sitting there, it's a team of people, like you said, potentially similar to drone strikes and stuff. You'll have a legal advisor, you'll have this type of person. And so I think it might actually assist in having laws more uniformly applied, because we know that because of the subjectivity in one situation, cop A is going to react like this, and in the same situation, cop B was going to react very differently. So, yeah, I agree. It comes down to how it's going to be applied and practiced. But yes, I agree with you. It's not, the human's not out of the loop, and so that humaneness is still there, that ability to say, well, let me just wait a bit. It's not a yes or no, I'm going to take out the target like a robot would think. An algorithm will tell you, do it. So yeah, I agree with you. I think the headline is a little bit misleading.
Graham, your hand back up.
Yeah, Dawn, I actually think, I mean, if the objective is to gain that data and get that information back to an ops room, what's wrong with just carrying a kill cam? Or, I think it's the vehicle that they're using here. Why a dog? It could just be an ordinary drone. It depends what sort of end state effect that they're trying to achieve. I think it's the whole sort of idea of this zombie attack dog that's gonna kill people. Is probably what they're trying to portray as scary in this scenario.
Yeah, I mean, they've got those like crawler robots, right, that look like mini tanks that they're using for EOD, right, explosive ordnance disposal. Yeah. It's the same concept, if you put the camera on there and a weapon on there. I agree with you, Graham. I think those dogs are cool. They're headless. They're a little creepy looking. And I think people have this mindset about a dog just like mentally, because dogs are used to like attack people. In certain circumstances. So yeah, optics matter. It depends on what this thing looks like. But Mike, go ahead, please. You got to comment on this one.
Yeah. So I do agree to Sinette's point. That's actually one of the more eloquent kind of takes on. Okay, you're pulling it out of an individual reactive officer's hands, and the way it was written in terms of this still being a remote controlled drone or robot. Yeah, I can see why you guys were leaning towards that, but the issue I have is, what's the next step? Are these then used for crowd control? And now you're in a really, really dangerous situation. Secondly, the kind of reasoning behind this was an increase in terrorism, which statistically I'm not sure is actually justified to deploy this technology. I do agree with the point that now you are, if you're using a drone to or robot to deliver a communication device, and the same device can be used to actually kill a target, you're now actually creating confusion for hostage negotiations. And secondly, or thirdly, I'm not sure that the removal of the person in the situation is actually a good a good result. So you're saying that you have more operational awareness from a robot. That depends on how many robots you're running. I don't think that in a closed corridor situation like we're talking about, that your perception from that robot's camera is actually increased from a human. I think it's probably diminished, and especially if we try to take a next level, like, all right, having a human in the loop, I think is absolutely critical here. I think once you get into using robots with perception, I think you're going to see so much failure because these situations are not controllable, that you'll see that would be a very, very dangerous next evolution. So, and the public gets to speak on this. If they don't want these things, they don't want them. And they spoke. So it seemed like the initial kind of push for this was without public knowledge or consent. So that's why they had to roll it back, because it was a big black eye.
You know, I think facts matter. You know, they always matter. And what we see here, just like we see in the counter UAS world, is people making decisions without information. They're coming, right? Because people like, oh, counter UAS, it's so horrible. You're going to be blowing all these, commercial drone pilots out of the sky, or you're going to be taking out people with their pacemakers and shutting down hospitals. Well, okay, you have no clue what you're talking about. Like, get the briefing on the technology and understand what the TTPs are, and then we can talk intelligently about whether this is a good idea or not. Because I'll tell you what, and who gets to use it, right? Like, so who gets to use it? Like, what are the rules? Because maybe this is good for SWATs. Because the idea behind this was, I think they referred to it as the Mandalay Bay scenario, right, in Las Vegas. That's why Brink Drones created their whole line of effort. Was, if there were semi-autonomous or autonomous drones that could have saved people's lives in Las Vegas when that guy was in a window shooting people, right? So they created drones that can knock down doors, that can do all kinds of things. This robot is no different. If you can give someone a tool that can ultimately save lives, as long as it is used correctly, and that is the underscore here. I don't care what you're doing with technology. There's going to be people that misuse it, but if it's used correctly, then this could be, I think, a positive thing. But again, what does that look like? Because not every Tom, Dick, and Harry should have their hands on this and be able to use it. There needs to be approval authorities. There needs to be a chain of command. There needs to be, very strict rules in the United States, rules for the use of force on how this is employed. Sanette.
Thanks. Yes, I think to add on to what both yourself and Graham said, it comes down to public participation. And I find this is something, and I'm coming back to drones now again, that's something that we sometimes miss. Within the participants of this podcast now, we know a lot about drones, what it can, what it can't, what it should, what it shouldn't. And so we day to day live in a little bit of a bubble, that we create these things and talk about it and promote it, and we forget that you need public acceptance for any technology to really make a difference in our lives and move forward. And so I find we sometimes run so far ahead, then we remember, oh, by the way, when we want to scale this up, we actually need public acceptance, public participation, all of these things, and then it becomes really difficult. Then you find yourself in a situation where you're trying to validate the technology that you're bringing in.
Yeah, you're in a quagmire.
You're trying to convince,
like a PR quagmire.
Yeah, you're trying to convince people that this is good. And I think if you end up in that situation where now you're on the back foot trying to convince people that it's good and that you've lost round one. So a lesson to be learned is we should actually include public and educate the public right from the onset when we're even thinking about these things, and have them move forward with us instead of streaming ahead and they stay behind.
I want to make one more quick comment, and that's about markings. because, you know, on the battlefield, you're supposed to mark, right, your equipment, your people, like Americans are supposed to wear a flag. If you're Red Cross, if you're medics, you're supposed to have, it's supposed to be white with a red cross. There are universal symbols. Why do we not have those for law enforcement, robots, and drones? In other words, that concern about like, oh, robots rolling out, it's giving a phone, but people might think it. No, that should have a specific marking. Like, you know, this has a specific purpose, and those need to be publicized. And you're right, Sinette, that the public needs to be educated. If you see this marking, this is safe. Right. So anyway.
Yeah, but Dawn, how does that help? So the person who's in the holding the hostages, like, they need to be educated on what the markings of the drone that's delivering either a death blow or a communication device are.
If you want them to pick up the phone, if that's the concern, like, oh, this creates confusion and you won't even be able to talk to people. But you know what? They don't need phones anymore. They can talk to them through the drone.
Right. The
Anyway.
actual drone. No, I don't know. We could get theoretical in a lot of different ways here, but just to say, Open Robotics was one of the people that protested this at the original council meeting. So they are one of the main developers of the technology. It was really a single vendor that pushed this through in San Francisco. And to Sinette's point, that's not what you want. You want a public discussion so that the protocols for use are specific and worked through in a fashion that's transparent, because otherwise you're not going to get a level of trust or support from the public. And I think that's what happened here. Whereas in Nevada, they had an incident to draw back on, and that's why people felt more comfortable and had a breakthrough in fusion energy. So I had to bring this up because one of the most interesting aspects of it to me was it was done by a government entity rather than the private sector, which is, you know, in America, not what we're used to. Most of the innovation does come from the private sector because, or where of the way things are funded and the rapid ability of very talented people to get direction, but also respond to market forces. But certain things are very, very hard because, let's face it, if you're developing a fusion reactor, it's not like you're creating one iteration and then it goes to market and it gives you audience feedback and you iterate from there. So these type of things, interestingly enough, if you look back on the history of them, tend to be, the breakthroughs tend to come more from the public side. But I did look into this, and so this is inertial confinement fusion energy. So the way that they did this, it requires two types of hydrogen isotopes, and they basically beam a laser into, let's say, a cylinder, tin can, so to speak, and basically from the heat reaction against these isotopes and the reflection around the cylinder, we're able to generate more energy out than went in. So there's other competing kind of formats to this I've seen by private companies, and they tend to kind of fire the atoms at each other, and it's literally the force against each other and the magnetic containment that generates the heat. So that's the other competing technology, but this one won out in terms of getting to reality first with a net positive in energy. And the reason that this is so significant is that basically a single cup would be able to of hydrogen would be able to power a house for its entire lifespan. So, if not longer. So the energy savings there is out of this world if we're able to scale up this technology. And one of the most interesting things to me is we're hearing people say that, oh, this will be 50 years away. Well, when nuclear fission was discovered and the ability to actually contain that for electricity production, it was only 20 years to market, 20 to 30 years to market. So I have the feeling that if this is able to scale up in the next year or so and they're able to get a better net positive energy, say like a 1-to-2 ratio, that you'll see this on the market very fast. And this is actually a triumphant moment for humanity. End of story. That's my take on it. I'm curious what you all think. Who wants to go first?
I'll go. I love science, and I think that what this demonstrates. First of all, I want to make a plug for the government. most of your basic research that requires a lot of money is going to require government involvement because it's expensive. There's it takes time and money and resources. And, what I have found the best way to use private sector is once the government, gets past the basic research and has a capability that can then be repeatable, sustainable, and brought to market. And it needs some more customization. It needs some more software. It needs some things, right? So I think the government, we've got to continue investing in the National Science Foundation. We've got to continue and we've got to put more money in these programs because that's what fuels the economy eventually and companies like ours to be able to take that and accelerate that in operations. And what I wanted to say there is that, the fusion problem of getting that commercialized is probably the hurdles technologically and scientifically are probably doable more quickly, 10, 20 years, 15 years. The challenge is getting it out and scaling it, right? So I think about Edison and Tesla, right? So who won out? Edison won out in the electric world, but Tesla had a better solution. And that was because he was able to commercialize, get it out there and scale it in a way so you win. You win because you got to market, even though you may not have the best solution. And so it's just going to be interesting to watch this evolve. I mean, obviously, it's going to be really important for our society. It's going to be really important for our planet. And I'm an environmental guy, right? I don't think people are taking the climate change problem seriously enough. I'm very concerned. I mean, I'm not political about this. I'm just scientific about it. And the facts are the facts. And, we're starting to see, and I don't want to make this is not political, but we're starting to see the effects of things that I grew up in 1960s and 70s. I'm watching the weather change, and I used to take really close logs of that when I was a kid. And I'm seeing, I get frustrated because I can't get a snowstorm anymore on the East Coast, right? Now, that's a personal, emotional problem, but it has to do with this whole changing climate. So we need to get these kind of technologies out so we get back to an equilibrium, and that's what I'm rooting for.
Yeah, you combine this with battery storage capability, which has only gotten better, and there's even outside of the liquid battery types, there's solid battery types now, or dry battery types too, and you combine that with energy that is able that's carbon neutral. So you have energy creation that's carbon neutral, and then energy storage that is only impactful at its first extraction. And you're in a completely different human landscape. So I'm really excited about it. And cheers to the government for being the original open source software, right? All right.
Yes.
Don,
Yeah,
Don,
I want to tag on two different things. The first is kind of this environmental aspect, just to elaborate on that, why this is such a big deal. These reactions emit zero carbon, and they produce no long-lived radioactive waste. That's why this is so significant. The quote in the article, not only game-changing, but, quote, fusion has the potential to lift more citizens of the world out of poverty than anything since the invention of fire. I mean, think about that for a second. That's why this is...
Dawn, who invented fire? Was that a government program?
It probably was, and that's my second point. That's my second point.
There's a pre-government, pre-private sector.
I've written about this. I think, it really wasn't until I was more senior in the United States Air Force as an attorney there that, my eyes were open to technology transfer and transition, and all those different authorities. If anybody out there has interest in working with the federal government, there's this thing called the FLC, Federal Laboratory Consortium. Go to their website. You can see the list of all the different federal laboratories, all the equipment that's available to you, possibly to use for free, all kinds of different programs. I mean, they have an amazing search bar. You could put in, I have a UAS and I want to focus on freezing wings. Something like this, and a list of 20 different organizations you could work with would come up, and people that want to partner with you. So I know Tyler and Don both in their organizations have worked with some of these different programs, not just the FAA, it's not just NASA, it's universities out there. They're outside the federal lab consortium, but I'll just throw it out there. The United States Air Force Academy is a federal lab and a university both. So you've got the military service academies that fit the bill and have really unique authorities to partner with people and companies. So check that out if that's something you're interested in. But that's where this idea of working together and then commercializing it, that's what this is all about.
Dawn, those small business, innovation grants, research grants are key. They actually bring universities. So what I do is I look for university that's developed something that may have been funded by the government. I see the technology's gotten to a certain level. Then NASA comes out, or the FAA comes out, or somebody comes out with a call that says we need this capability as part of an SBIR, a Small Business Innovation Research Grant. And as long as you're less than 50% owned by a VC, you can apply for these, and they will help you accelerate getting something out of a lab that may take years otherwise. And it also is like a little mini VC fund for your company, because it's non-equity money, and they don't keep your IP. Your IP is your IP. When you do an SBIR, you just got to be careful about how you write, the data rights and stuff. But it's not IP. It's your IP. So you got to take advantage of these programs.
Tyler.
Yeah, so I wanted to kind of go full circle here, talking about how we can communicate scientific topics, and this is obviously fusion energy is one that is way over my head, but I really recommend folks going out and looking at the video by Dr. Marvin Adams at the press conference. He's the Deputy Administrator for the National Nuclear Security Administration. In 3 minutes, does a perfect job of explaining what happened, what they did, how it's impactful. So I just want to put that plug in if folks have some 3 minutes of spare time. When I was heard about that announcement, saw this video, it was a fantastic way of explaining in simple terms what happened and why it's so important. But alongside with Dawn, I'm a big sci-fi guy. I've been going through the last few months the Expanse audiobook series, also the TV show, and a big part of that is interstellar space travel or interplanetary space travel, and hearing about this technology, the same technology that was explained in that 3-minute video is the same thing that powers those spaceships, and it's like, I could see the link there, and I can see, as humans we're an exploratory species, and part of me is sad that I don't live in a time where we're learning more about the planet that we live on. Basically, all of Earth is. I can bring up Google Earth and zoom in at all these different places, and there's no real unexplored locations. And to think that we're getting, closer, maybe in my lifetime, probably not, but maybe, the next generation, that they're in a position where, based on the great work that the scientists and engineers and researchers, all the work that they've been doing can be applied to, that next stage of humanity, which really, really excites me.